The metal detector didn't just beep. It screamed, tearing through the bustle of Terminal 3. I stood barefoot on the cold tiles, hands raised, watching my grandfather's leather briefcase sit abandoned at the end of the conveyor belt. 3 officers surrounded me, hands hovering near their holsters. A man in a black suit approached. Homeland Security. I checked my watch. 4 hours until the hearing. 1,500 miles away. My parents were undoubtedly popping champagne. My name is Rowan Asherton, and I have spent the last decade of my life uncovering the financial sins of Fortune 500 executives. I am a senior forensic auditor at Vanguard Horizon, a job that requires the precision of a surgeon and the cold detachment of a mortician. I do not panic. I do not make mistakes. I certainly do not get flagged as a domestic terrorist threat while trying to board a domestic flight to Montana. Yet here I was, watching the carefully constructed architecture of my life crumble under the fluorescent lights of O'Hare International Airport. 10 minutes before the siren screamed, I was just another face in the endless serpentine line of the priority access lane. My mind was not on the humiliating ritual of removing my shoes or the hygiene nightmare of walking on public airport carpet. My mind was entirely fixated on a courtroom in Blackwood County, Montana, and the hearing scheduled for 1 o'clock this afternoon. I had calculated the logistics down to the minute. The flight was 3 hours and 40 minutes. The drive from the airstrip to the courthouse was 45 minutes. I had a buffer of exactly 60 minutes. It was tight, but for a woman who organizes her spice rack by molecular weight, it was manageable. I gripped the handle of my leather briefcase until my knuckles turned white. Inside that bag, buried beneath a change of clothes and a toiletry kit, was a red manila folder sealed with tamper-evident tape. It was the Holy Grail. It was the reason my parents, Grant and Elena Asherton, had spent the week following my grandfather's funeral tearing apart his study like rabid wolves. They had pulled books from shelves and ripped up floorboards looking for this file. They assumed it was a new will. They were wrong. It was something far more volatile. It was an accounting of sins they thought were buried deep in the bedrock of a shell company in the Cayman Islands. Next, the TSA agent barked. He looked bored. His eyes glazed over with the monotony of staring at thousands of travelers. I stepped forward. I placed my briefcase on the belt. I watched it slide into the dark maw of the X-ray machine. I felt a spike of irrational anxiety, the kind I always felt when letting that folder out of my sight, even for 10 seconds. I removed my blazer, folding it neatly into the bin. I took off my heels. This was the part I hated most. I suffer from a mild but persistent cleanliness syndrome. The idea of my bare feet touching the gray, industrial tile where millions of strangers had walked made my skin crawl. I forced myself to breathe. Inhale. Exhale. It is just bacteria. You have sanitizer in your bag. I stepped into the body scanner. I raised my hands in the surrender position required by federal law. The machine whirred around me, a cylindrical judge passing its silent verdict. Usually, this is where the agent waves you through. Usually, you grab your belt, put your shoes back on, and sprint to the gate to buy an overpriced Americano. Not today. The machine did not give a friendly chirp. It let out a harsh, dissonant buzz that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. The light on the operator's console did not turn green. It flashed a violent, strobing red. "Step out. Now!" The voice did not belong to the bored agent from before. It came from a man who had materialized from the shadows of the security checkpoint. He was not wearing the blue uniform of the Transportation Security Administration. He was wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than my car. And his earpiece was wired directly into a collar that looked stiff with starch. "Sir, I think there is a mistake," I said, my voice steady, though my pulse had just jumped to 120 beats per minute. "I have a metal plate in my ankle from a skiing accident in—" "Do not move," the suit commanded. He did not look at my face. He looked at my hands. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Suddenly, the air in Terminal 3 changed. The ambient noise of rolling suitcases and crying babies seemed to drop away, replaced by a suffocating tension. 2 uniformed officers flanked me. They were not smiling. One of them had his hand resting on the grip of his taser. "This is ridiculous," I said, channeling the authority I used when staring down corrupt CEOs. "My name is Rowan Asherton. I am a forensic auditor. I have pre-check clearance. I have global entry. If you check my record, you will see that I have never even jaywalked." "Ma'am, we need you to come with us," the man in the suit said. He stepped into my personal space, grabbing my upper arm with a grip that was professional but entirely unyielding. "My bag," I protested, twisting my neck to look at the conveyor belt. "My briefcase is right there. I need my briefcase." "It is being secured," he said. "Walk." They did not take me to the secondary screening area where they swab your hands for explosives. That would have been manageable. Instead, they marched me past the gawking lines of travelers. A barefoot criminal in a silk blouse, paraded like a trophy. I could feel the eyes of strangers burning into me. I saw a teenager raise his phone, filming the spectacle. I wanted to scream, but I knew that any sign of aggression would only tighten the net. They led me to a glass-walled room located right in the center of the concourse. It was a fishbowl. It was designed for transparency, but right now, it felt like a cage at a zoo. The walls were soundproof, meaning the hundreds of people walking by could see me being interrogated, but they could not hear my defense. It was a public shaming ritual disguised as security protocol. The man in the suit shoved me into a metal chair bolted to the floor. The room smelled of industrial cleaner and stale sweat. My bare feet were freezing against the linoleum. I curled my toes, trying to minimize contact with the floor, trying to keep the nausea at bay. "I want to know what is going on," I demanded, crossing my arms. "I have a flight to catch in 40 minutes. If I miss that flight, I miss a court hearing that determines the fate of a $50 million estate. If this is a random check, you are costing me more than just time." The man sat down opposite me. He placed a file on the metal table between us. He looked at me with eyes that were devoid of empathy. "I am Special Agent Miller," he said, "Homeland Security, and this is not a random check. Ms. Asherton." He opened the file. There was a single sheet of paper inside. It looked like a printout of an email. "We received a credible tip roughly 30 minutes ago," Miller said, his voice flat. "The tipster identified you by name, physical description, and flight number. They allege that you are currently transporting highly classified, encrypted government documents stolen from a federal database." I stared at him. The accusation was so absurd, so completely detached from reality, that I almost laughed. "That is insane. I am an auditor for a private financial firm. I audit hedge funds, not the Pentagon. Search my bag. You will find a change of clothes, a toiletry kit, and a file regarding a family inheritance dispute. That is it." Miller did not blink. "The tipster also warned that you are suffering from an acute manic episode and may be prone to violent outbursts if confronted. They claimed you have a history of delusions regarding conspiracy theories." The words hit me like a physical blow. The coldness in my stomach turned into ice. Acute manic episode, violent outbursts. The vocabulary was specific. It was clinical. It was designed to delegitimize anything I said from this point forward. If I got angry, I was proving the mania. If I argued too logically, I was proving the conspiracy delusion. And then, the realization washed over me. It was not a wave. It was a tsunami. My father. Grant Asherton had been a high-powered defense attorney before he was disbarred for ethical violations 5 years ago. He knew the law. More importantly, he knew the loopholes. He knew exactly what keywords triggered the Department of Homeland Security's automated threat assessment algorithms. You do not just call the police and say your daughter has a gun. That gets a local response. You call a federal tip line and use words like encrypted data, government theft, and unstable. That triggers the Patriot Act protocols. That freezes the subject. That strips them of their rights for a holding period of up to 24 or 48 hours without a warrant. He did not need me arrested. He just needed me delayed. "This is a lie," I said, my voice trembling with a rage I struggled to suppress. "My father did this. My father, Grant Asherton, made that call. I am on my way to a court hearing where I am the opposing party against him. He is trying to make me miss the hearing. Miller looked unimpressed. Family drama does not usually involve the Department of Homeland Security. Ms. Asherton, we take these allegations seriously. Check the source, I snapped, leaning forward. Check the number that called you. I guarantee you it is a burner phone or a blocked ID. Do I look like a cyber terrorist to you? I am a germaphobe who cannot stand to touch this table. Look at me. Miller leaned back, tapping his pen on the table. We are investigating the source, but until we can verify the contents of your electronic devices and that briefcase, you are not going anywhere. My briefcase, I whispered. Where is it? It is being scanned by our bomb disposal unit and will then be subjected to a forensic document search, Miller said. If there is nothing to hide, you have nothing to worry about. You do not understand, I said, desperation creeping into my voice. My flight leaves in 30 minutes. The next flight to Montana is not until tonight. The hearing is at 1 o'clock. If I am not there, the judge will rule in default. You are aiding and abetting a fraud. Miller ignored me. He reached out his hand. Your phone, Ms. Asherton. Unlock it and place it on the table. I have attorney-client privilege, I bluffed. I was not a lawyer, but I knew enough to try. Not when national security is invoked, Miller countered smoothly. Phone, now. I looked at the device in my hand. It was my lifeline. It was my connection to Harold, my grandfather's lawyer. It was my only way to prove I was trapped here and not simply skipping the hearing. If I refused, they would tackle me. They would charge me with resisting a federal officer. That would play right into the violent outburst narrative. I unlocked the phone. I placed it on the cold metal table. Miller slid it into a Faraday bag, a silver, signal-blocking pouch that cut the device off from the network instantly. We will hold you here while we process the evidence, Miller said, standing up. Do not bang on the glass. Do not make a scene. Someone will be in to take your statement shortly. He turned and walked out, the heavy door sealing with a pneumatic hiss. I sat there, frozen, through the glass. I could see the departures board. The status of my flight to Montana blinked from on time to boarding. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer, overwhelming violation of it all. I was trapped in a glass box, barefoot, and stripped of my dignity, while 1,500 miles away. My father was likely straightening his tie and rehearsing his sad, disappointed face for the judge. Rowan is so unstable, Your Honor. We tried to get her help. It is a tragedy she could not be here. I closed my eyes and took a breath that rattled in my chest. They wanted me to break. They wanted me to scream and pound on the glass so everyone in the terminal would see the crazy woman. They wanted the narrative to become reality. I opened my eyes. I stared at the reflection of myself in the glass. No, I was Rowan Asherton. I found the missing decimals in billion-dollar ledgers. I found the corpses buried in the spreadsheets. I did not get played. I did the playing. I looked at the door Miller had just exited. I looked at the way the lock engaged. I looked at the camera in the corner of the room. My father had played a strong card, a joker, but he had forgotten one thing. He had taught me how the system worked before he forgot how to be a father. And he had forgotten that you never, ever corner a forensic auditor who has nothing left to lose but the truth. I placed my hands flat on the table. Ignoring the grime, I was not going to miss that hearing, even if I had to tear this airport apart brick by brick to get there. I sat in the glass cage and forced my heart rate to decelerate. Panic is a physiological response, a flood of cortisol and adrenaline designed to make a primate run from a predator. But I was not a primate in the savannah, and Special Agent Miller was not a lion. He was a bureaucrat. And bureaucrats, no matter how terrifying their badges, operate within a system of boxes, ticks, and protocols. If you can find the edge of the box, you can break it. I shifted into audit mode. In my line of work, when I walk into a CFO's office to find missing millions, I do not look at the spreadsheets first. I look at the man. Is he sweating? Is he tapping his foot? Is he over-explaining? Miller returned to the room, carrying 2 cups of water. He placed one in front of me. It was a peace offering, or perhaps an interrogation tactic designed to make me feel dependent on him for basic survival needs. I did not touch it. "We need to talk about the contents of your briefcase," Miller said. Taking his seat, he had loosened his tie slightly, a microscopic sign of stress. "Good." "I have already told you," I said, keeping my voice devoid of the hysteria he was expecting. "It contains personal effects and legal documents regarding the estate of Arthur Asherton. Nothing more." Miller opened the file on the table again. He slid a piece of paper across the metal surface. It was a photocopy of a medical intake form. "This was attached to the email we received," Miller said. "It is a diagnosis form from the St. Jude Psychiatric Ward. It is dated 2 days ago. It lists you as an involuntary admission for bipolar I disorder with psychotic features. It says you escaped custody this morning." I looked at the paper. The formatting was convincing. The letterhead looked authentic. But as my eyes scanned the text, the anomalies began to pop out like red flags on a tax return. The diagnosis code was correct. ICD-10 standards, but the handwriting in the physician's notes section was too neat. Doctor's scrawl, nurse's print, and the phrasing was specific. Subject exhibits grandiose delusions regarding family finances and persecution complex. "Persecution complex," I repeated, looking up at Miller. "That is convenient." "The tipster identified himself as your treating physician," Miller said, watching my reaction closely. "He said you posed a danger to yourself and others, specifically mentioning a fixation on bringing down the system at a federal level." "My treating physician," I said slowly, testing the words. "Did this doctor give a name?" "Dr. Alistair Thorne," Miller said. "There is no doctor. Alistair Thorne at St. Jude," I said. "And I know this because I have never been a patient at St. Jude. But do you know who used to work at St. Jude nearly 20 years ago?" "My stepmother, Elena." Miller paused. His eyes flickered to the paper. "Elena was a triage nurse before she married my father," I continued, pressing the advantage. "She knows the codes. She knows the layout of the forms. But she made a mistake. Look at the signature at the bottom. It is signed A. Thorne, M.D., but look at the curve of the T. That is a nurse's loop. It is a specific calligraphy taught in nursing schools in the 90s to ensure legibility on charts. A doctor does not write like that. Elena does." Miller pulled the paper back, frowning. "You are claiming your stepmother forged a medical document to get you on a no-fly list?" "I am claiming my stepmother and my father are currently trying to steal $5 million, and I am the only person standing in their way," I said. "They knew that if they called the police with a domestic dispute, you would just pull me aside for 10 minutes. They needed the nuclear option. They needed Homeland Security." Miller looked skeptical. "That is a hell of a risk for them to take. Filing a false report of terrorism is a felony carrying 10 years in federal prison." "They are desperate," I said. "And they think I will be too broken by this humiliation to fight back. They think I will miss the hearing. The judge will rule against me, and by the time I get out of here, the money will be in an offshore account, and they will be in Brazil." Miller stared at me. I could see the gears turning. He was trying to reconcile the woman in front of him. Calm, articulate, dressed in a tailored suit, with the maniac described in the report. "We are going to search the bag now," Miller said. Standing up, he signaled to the glass wall. The door opened, and a second agent entered. He was wearing blue latex gloves. He was carrying my leather briefcase. My stomach tightened. That bag contained the ledger. If they confiscated it, if they lost it, if they even mixed up the pages, everything was over. "Please be careful," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "The papers in the red folder are fragile. They are original documents." The agent ignored me. He placed the bag on the table and unzipped it. He began pulling out my silk blouses, shaking them out as if I might be hiding a microchip in the hem. He took out my toiletry bag, opening the shampoo bottles and sniffing them. Then, His hand reached for the red folder. "Do not open the seal," I said, instinctively half rising from my chair. Miller's hand shot out, pushing me back down by the shoulder. "Sit down, now, or you will be restrained." I forced myself to sit. I gripped the edges of the cold metal chair. "That folder is sealed evidence for a court case. If you break the chain of custody without a warrant, you are violating my Fourth Amendment rights." The agent with the gloves looked at Miller. Miller nodded. The agent ripped the tape. I felt a physical pain in my chest, as if he had torn my skin. The agent flipped through the pages. Rows and rows of numbers. My grandfather's handwriting, the undeniable proof of 10 years of embezzlement. "It looks like accounting nonsense," the agent muttered. "Just numbers." "It is evidence of a crime," I said through gritted teeth, "but not the kind you are looking for." Miller looked at the agent. "Run it through the scanner for residue, then box it." "Box it?" I asked. "No, you cannot keep it. I need that for the hearing." "Everything is being held as evidence until your status is cleared," Miller said. I closed my eyes. I had to change the dynamic. I was playing defense. I needed to play offense. I needed to stop being Rowan Asherton, the victimized daughter, and start being Rowan Asherton, the nightmare auditor. I opened my eyes. I looked directly at the camera in the corner of the room. Then I looked at Miller. "I am invoking my right to have this interview recorded on a secondary device," I said, my voice razor-sharp. "And under Federal Regulation 642 regarding the detention of civilians in transit, I am demanding the presence of a neutral third-party witness, preferably a representative from the airline or a legal ombudsman." Miller blinked. He had not expected me to know the specific regulation codes. Most people just screamed for a lawyer. "You are not under arrest yet," Miller said. "This is a preliminary detention, which is why I am entitled to a witness to ensure my civil liberties are not being infringed upon based on a falsified medical report," I countered. "And while we are at it, Agent Miller, I think you should check my employment file again. Specifically, the clearance level. This was the bluff. I worked for Vanguard Horizon. We had government contracts, yes, but I was not currently on one. However, the system was vast, and the bureaucracy was slow. I am currently the lead auditor on a classified project regarding the discretionary spending of Senator Sterling's subcommittee on infrastructure." I lied. The lie tasted like ash, but I delivered it with the conviction of a saint. Senator Sterling is a man who values punctuality. If I miss my check-in because I am being held based on a tip from a disgruntled relative, he is going to ask questions. And when Senator Sterling asks questions, people like you lose their pensions. Miller froze. The name drop hung in the air. Senator Sterling was real. He was powerful, and he was known for being vindictive. "You are auditing a senator?" Miller asked, skepticism warring with fear. "I cannot confirm or deny the specifics of the assignment due to the non-disclosure agreement I signed," I said, leaning back and crossing my legs. "Which, ironically, you are currently putting at risk by exposing my materials to an unsecured environment. If any of those papers in that red folder are leaked or lost, the liability falls on this office, on you, specifically." It was a beautiful weave of truth and fiction. The red folder had nothing to do with a senator, but Miller did not know that. He looked at the folder. He looked at the accounting nonsense inside. To an untrained eye, a ledger of embezzled family funds looks exactly like a ledger of embezzled government funds. Miller turned to the other agent. "Stop the search." The agent froze, holding my travel-sized toothpaste. Miller walked over to the computer terminal in the corner of the room. He began typing furiously. I knew what he was doing. He was running a deep background check. He was looking for the red flags the doctor had promised. He would not find them. He would find a credit score of 820. He would find a clean driving record. He would find a registered voter who never missed an election. He would find a woman who paid her taxes 2 weeks early. "This does not make sense," Miller muttered to himself, but loud enough for me to hear. "What does not make sense, Agent Miller?" I asked, my voice soft but commanding. That a woman who is supposedly in the middle of a manic psychotic break has the presence of mind to quote federal detention codes? Or that the dangerous terrorist you were promised is actually a boring accountant who just wants to go to Montana to bury her grandfather in peace? Miller stopped typing. He turned around. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a dawn of horrifying realization. He looked at the fake medical report on the table. Then he looked at me. "The tip came from a burner phone," he said quietly. "We traced the IP. It bounced off 3 servers." "Of course it did," I said. "My father knows how to cover his tracks, but he got sloppy with the medical lingo. He let his wife write it." Miller ran a hand over his face. He looked at the clock on the wall. It was now 45 minutes past the hour. "If this is a hoax," Miller said, his voice tight. "If someone used the Department of Homeland Security as a weapon in a civil dispute, then you are the weapon, Agent Miller," I finished for him. "You are the gun they pointed at my head, and right now, the trigger is pulled. The only question is, are you going to let the bullet hit, or are you going to help me dodge it?" He looked at the boarding pass on the table. "Your flight left 10 minutes ago." "I know," I said. "And the next one is tonight, which is too late. My parents knew that. They won. Unless you fix this." Miller looked at me. For the first time, I saw a flicker of alliance. He was angry, not at me anymore. He was angry that he had been played. He was angry that his authority had been hijacked by a disbarred lawyer and a nurse with a grudge. "I cannot get that plane to turn around," Miller said. "I do not need that plane," I said. Standing up, I walked to the glass, ignoring the agent with the gloves. "I need my phone, I need my bag, and I need a miracle. You took away my time. You owe me." Miller stared at the medical report one last time. He crumpled it in his fist. "Clear her," he barked at the other agent. "Pack her bag. Give her the phone." The agent scrambled to obey. Miller walked to the door and unlocked it. He held it open for me. "You are free to go, Ms. Asherton," he said. "But you are right. You are stranded. What are you going to do?" I stepped out of the glass cage. The noise of the terminal rushing back into my ears like a breaking wave. I grabbed my briefcase, clutching it to my chest like a shield. "I am going to find a way to Montana," I said, checking my watch. "Even if I have to fly myself." But as I looked at the departures board, a sea of red canceled and delayed signs stared back at me. And then my phone buzzed in my hand as it reconnected to the network, a text from my father. "Safe flight, sweetheart." Oh wait, I looked at the text. I looked at Miller, and then I started to run. Not toward the gates, but toward the exit, toward the only chance I had left. A chance that smelled of jet fuel and desperation. The minutes inside that glass fishbowl stretched and warped. Time becoming a tangible enemy pressing against my chest, while Agent Miller was in the corner, speaking in hushed, urgent tones into his headset. My mind drifted back to the previous evening. It was the only way to keep the panic at bay, to trace the breadcrumbs of this disaster back to their source. I remembered standing in my kitchen, packing the red folder. My phone had rung. The caller ID displayed Dad. I had debated not answering. We had not spoken since the funeral, where he had made a scene about the catering costs while standing 3 feet from his father's open casket. But curiosity, or perhaps a lingering, foolish hope for decency, made me slide the answer bar. "Rowan, honey." His voice had been syrupy, dripping with a faux warmth that made my skin prickle. "I just wanted to wish you safe travels for tomorrow. You are still flying out of O'Hare, right? The 9:30 flight?" 9:45. I had corrected him automatically. A reflex of my precise nature. "Why?" "Oh, just worrying about the weather," he had said. "I hear there are storms over the Rockies. I would hate for you to get delayed and miss the festivities." Festivities. That was what he called a court hearing to determine the misappropriation of a legacy. "I will be there, Dad," I had said coldly. "And so will the ledger." There had been a pause, a silence so heavy I could hear him breathing. Then, a short, sharp intake of air. "Right, the ledger. Well, Travel safe. Rowan, watch out for security. He had hung up before I could parse the oddness of that final comment. Watch out for security. It had not been a warning, it had been a gloat. He knew. He had known exactly what was coming because he had already set the wheels in motion. My flashback was shattered by Miller slamming a receiver down on its cradle. He turned back to the table, and the change in his demeanor was absolute. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a rigid, simmering fury, but it was not directed at me. He walked over and sat down, dragging his chair closer with a screech of metal on linoleum. He placed his hands on the table, interlacing his fingers. "We called St. Jude's," Miller said. His voice was quiet, dangerous. "We spoke to the chief of psychiatry and the human resources director. We had them search their database going back 30 years. I waited, keeping my face neutral, though my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. There is no Dr. Alistair Thorne, Miller stated. There never has been. And furthermore, there is no record of a patient named Rowan Asherton ever being admitted, voluntarily or otherwise. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. "I told you." "You did," Miller acknowledged. He looked at the fake medical report again, seeing it now for what it was, not evidence, but a weapon. "We traced the call that came into the Threat Assessment Center. As you suspected, it was a burner number, untraceable service provider, activated yesterday, used once, and likely destroyed immediately after. So you have nothing," I said. Feeling the weight of the injustice settling on my shoulders, "You held me here, publicly humiliated me, and caused me to miss my flight based on a ghost." "Not a ghost," Miller corrected. "We record all incoming calls to the threat line, standard protocol for voice printing and future prosecution." My head snapped up. "You have the recording?" "We do?" "Play it," I demanded. Miller hesitated. "That is classified material. Ms. Asherton, I am the subject of the call," I fired back, leaning over the table. "I am the victim of this federal crime. If you want my cooperation in not filing a massive lawsuit against this department for unlawful imprisonment, you will play that recording. I need to know who pulled the trigger." I knew who it was, but I needed Miller to know that I knew. I needed him to hear the proof. Miller reached into his pocket and pulled out a digital recorder. He tapped the screen and set it on the table between us. Click. Static hissed for a second. Then, a voice filled the small room. It was muffled, distorted, as if the speaker was talking through a thick piece of cloth. "I need to report a threat. Immediate danger." The voice was breathless, panicked. It was a performance, a bad one. "Her name is Rowan Asherton. She's at Terminal 3. She has classified documents, stolen, and she is unstable. She has a weapon. She said she was going to make them pay." I listened, tilting my head. The distortion was heavy, but the cadence was unmistakable. The way the speaker emphasized the word unstable, drawing out the vowels, the slight lisp on the S sounds. "Who is this?" the operator's voice asked on the recording. "Dr. Thorne, Alistair Thorne. I am her treating physician. She is in a manic state. You have to stop her before she gets on that plane, if she gets to Montana." And there it was. I slammed my hand on the table. "Pause. Pause it right there." Miller hit the button. "What?" "Rewind 3 seconds, I commanded. Miller did. "If she gets to Montana," I looked at Miller, locking eyes with him. Why would a treating physician, calling about a national security threat involving stolen government documents, care about the destination? Why would he specifically mention Montana? If I was a terrorist with a bomb or stolen codes, the danger is the flight itself, or the airport. Montana is irrelevant to national security, but it is very relevant to a civil inheritance hearing. Miller's eyes widened. He replayed the segment. The slip-up was subtle, but to a trained ear, it was screaming. The caller had broken character. The doctor had momentarily become the frantic stepmother worried about a lawsuit. "And the voice," I continued, pressing my advantage. "Do you hear the muffled quality? It is not a bad connection. It is a physical filter. A handkerchief over the mouthpiece. Old school. Amateur. You recognize it, Miller said. It was not a question. It is Elena Asherton, I said flatly. My stepmother. She has a deviated septum from a botched rhinoplasty in the 90s. Listen to the breathing between the sentences. It is mouth breathing, heavy, slightly wheezing, even through the cloth. You can hear it. Miller listened again. He stared at the device. The color was rising in his neck. He was a federal agent, trained to spot terrorists and spies, and he had been manipulated by a suburban housewife with a burner phone and a handkerchief. She played you, I said, my voice low and hard. She used the Department of Homeland Security as her personal attack dog. She knew you would not verify the doctor until it was too late. She weaponized your protocols against me. Miller turned off the recorder. His grip on the device was white-knuckled. He looked furious. Not the professional, controlled anger of earlier, but the raw, personal anger of a man who realizes he has been made a fool of. This is a federal offense, Miller muttered. Making a false statement to a federal officer, misuse of emergency services, obstruction of justice, and unlawful detention, I added. Which is what is happening right now. Every second you keep me in this chair. Miller looked up at me. The power dynamic had completely inverted. He was no longer the interrogator. He was the man holding a ticking time bomb of liability. Ms. Asherton, he began, his tone almost apologetic. I want a copy of that recording, I said. And I want a certified incident report stating that I was detained based on a falsified malicious tip. I need that paper for court, if I walk into that hearing late. I need proof that it was not my negligence. I cannot give you the recording, Miller said, reverting to protocol. It is evidence in an active investigation now, an investigation against the caller. Then give me the report, I insisted, and release me, now, or I call my lawyer, and we discuss how your agency facilitated witness intimidation. Miller nodded. He stood up and walked to the door, shouting an order to the agents outside. Process her out. Return all personal effects immediately, and get me the legal department on the line. He turned back to me. I am going to write you a statement. It will confirm you were held for security screening and subsequently cleared. It will mention the false report. Thank you, I said, standing up. My legs felt shaky, the adrenaline of the confrontation beginning to fade, replaced by the cold dread of reality. I looked at the clock on the wall. The numbers burned into my retina. 10:15. My flight had been scheduled for 9:45. Agent Miller, I said, my voice catching slightly. My flight? Miller stopped writing. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine pity in his eyes. It was a look I hated. I checked the status while you were listening to the tape, he said softly. Flight 402 to Bozeman. The gate is closed. The aircraft has pushed back from the terminal. Can you call them? I asked, desperation clawing at my throat. You are Homeland Security. Can't you order them to return to the gate? Tell them it was a security error? Miller shook his head. Once the wheels are moving, unless there's a valid threat on board, we cannot recall a commercial airliner. It causes a cascade effect on the entire air traffic grid. The airline would sue us, and they would win. The plane is gone. Ms. Asherton. The words hung in the air like smoke. The plane is gone. I felt the blood drain from my face. I sank back into the metal chair. Gone. The only direct flight that would get me there by 1 o'clock. Check the other airlines, I said, my voice hollow. Connecting flights. We did, Miller said. Everything is booked solid or connects through Denver with a 3-hour layover. You would not land in Montana until 7 this evening. 7. 6 hours after the gavel would fall. 6 hours after my parents would have toasted their victory with my grandfather's vintage scotch. I cannot miss that hearing, I whispered. You do not understand. It is not just about the money. It is about the truth. If I am not there, the lie becomes the truth. Miller finished writing the statement. He stamped it with a heavy, red seal. He handed it to me. "I am sorry, he said. "Truly. We will go after the people who did this. We will prosecute them for the false report." "That does not help me now," I snapped, snatching the paper. "Prosecuting them next month does not stop them from stealing the estate today." I stood up, grabbing my briefcase which the other agent had just returned. I checked the seal on the red folder. It was broken, taped over with yellow evidence tape. Another violation, another scar. "I am leaving," I said. "And if I find a way to get there, I expect you to answer your phone when I call for verification." "I will," Miller said. "Ms. Asherton, good luck." I did not look back. I pushed through the heavy glass door. Stepping out of the fishbowl and back into the noise of the terminal, the air felt thin. The sounds of the airport, the announcements, the laughter, the rolling wheels, felt distant, like I was underwater. I walked to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the tarmac. I pressed my hand against the cold glass. Out there, taxiing toward the runway, was a silver Boeing 737 with the blue tail fin of my carrier. I watched as it turned, engines roaring, heat shimmer distorting the air behind it. It began its run, faster, faster, and then it lifted off. It carried with it my carefully laid plans. It carried with it my chance to confront my parents in a civilized manner. I watched until it disappeared into the low clouds hanging over Chicago. I was stranded. My parents had won the battle. They had used the machinery of the state to crush me. But as I watched the empty sky, a cold, hard resolve crystallized in my chest. They had won the battle of logistics, but the war was not over. I looked at the statement in my hand. Federal Incident Report. I looked at my phone. 0 missed calls from my parents. They thought I was in a cell. They thought I was broken. I pulled up my contacts. I scrolled past the airlines. I scrolled past the car rental agencies. I stopped at a name I had not called in 3 years. A name attached to a favor I had banked a lifetime ago. Jack the Mule Reynolds. He ran a cargo operation out of a hangar on the far south side of the airfield. He flew parts, mail, and sometimes things people did not want to ask questions about. He flew when the commercial birds were grounded. He flew rust buckets that defied the laws of aerodynamics. I dialed the number. It rang once, twice, 3 times. "Yeah?" a gruff voice answered, accompanied by the sound of a wrench hitting metal. "Jack," I said, turning away from the window and walking fast toward the exit. "It is Rowan Asherton. I need a lift." "Rowan?" The voice sounded surprised. "The auditor? I thought you were busy putting people like me in jail." "Not today," I said, ignoring the jab. "Today, I need to get to Montana, Blackwood County, and I need to be there in 3 hours." Jack laughed. It was a dry, rasping sound. 3 hours? To Montana? In this weather? You need a rocket, not a plane. "I need a pilot who owes me his freedom," I said, cutting him off. "Remember the IRS audit of 22? Remember the deduction regarding the fuel spills that I reclassified as operational loss? I saved you $200,000 in a felony charge." Jack. Silence on the other end. "I am at Terminal 3, I said. "I am coming to you. Do not tell me you cannot fly. Just tell me how much." A sigh. "Get to the South Cargo Gate, Access Road 4, and bring coffee, black." I hung up. I was not out. I was not done. The commercial route was closed. The safe route was gone. Now, I had to take the dangerous one. I tightened my grip on the briefcase handle. My parents wanted a fight? They were going to get one. They thought they had grounded me, but they forgot one thing about forensic auditors. We always find a way to balance the books. Even though I had set the wheels in motion with Jack, a small, stubborn part of my brain, the part that craved order and safety, refused to accept that a rusty cargo plane was my only option. I was Rowan Asherton. I solved problems with logic, not with action movie stunts. As I sprinted away from the security checkpoint, my heels clicking frantically against the terrazzo floor, I decided to make one last, desperate attempt at the conventional route. I threw myself against the counter of the airline customer service desk. There was a line of 3 people. I did not wait. I bypassed the stanchions, ignoring the indignant protests of a man in a Hawaiian shirt. "I need a seat on the next flight to Bozeman," I gasped, slamming my passport onto the high counter. "Or Billings, or Helena, anywhere in Montana." The agent, a woman with heavily sprayed hair and a name tag that read, Brenda, looked at me with the weary disdain of someone who had been yelled at for 8 hours straight. "Ma'am, the line starts back there," she said, pointing a manicured finger. "I have a medical emergency," I lied, the fabrication tasting like copper in my mouth. "My grandfather, please, just check." Brenda sighed, a long, deflating sound, and began to type. Her keystrokes were agonizingly slow. Click, pause, click, pause. I watched her fingers, fighting the urge to reach over and type the codes myself. Every second she wasted was a second my parents were using to poison the judge's mind. "Everything is booked," she droned. "There is a storm front moving over the Rockies. We have cancellations stacking up in Denver and Salt Lake. I can get you a standby seat for tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock. "Tomorrow is too late," I snapped, my voice cracking. "I need to be there by 1 o'clock today. Today." "I cannot control the weather, ma'am," Brenda said, turning her attention back to the man in the Hawaiian shirt. Next, I stumbled back from the counter, the rejection hitting me harder than I expected. I pulled my phone from my pocket. It was buzzing incessantly. I looked at the screen and saw a cascade of notifications from Harold. "My grandfather's attorney. Where are you? The bailiff just called the docket. Grant's lawyers filing a motion to proceed in absentia. They are claiming you have abandoned your claim. Rowan, pick up the phone." I dialed Harold's number. It rang and rang. Then, it went to voicemail. I cursed under my breath. He was likely already in the preliminary chambers, forced to silence his phone. I was alone. I opened my airline app, thinking I could maybe reroute through a partner airline myself. I tapped on the icon. The screen refreshed. No upcoming trips. I blinked. That was impossible. Even if I had missed the outbound flight, my return ticket for tomorrow night should still be there. I tapped the History tab. Itinerary canceled. Refund processed to original form of payment. My blood ran cold. I tapped the profile settings. The email address associated with the account had been changed. It was no longer my corporate email. It was ashertonfamilytrustgmail.com. I stopped dead in the middle of the concourse, people streaming around me like water around a stone. I had created that email address 10 years ago to manage the household bills when my mother was sick. My father still had the password. While I was sitting in that glass box, terrified and humiliated, he had logged in. He had used the forgot password feature on the airline site, sent the reset link to the family email, and canceled my entire journey. It was not just about stopping me from getting there. It was about erasing me. He wanted to make it look like I had voluntarily withdrawn. A refund request looks like a choice. It looks like I gave up. "You thorough, vindictive son of a bitch," I whispered. I had one card left to play. Money. If commercial airlines failed, I would buy my own wings. I had a significant savings account, a nest egg I had built by working 80-hour weeks for a decade. I stepped into a quiet alcove near the restrooms and pulled up the contact for a private charter broker I had audited 2 years ago. I dialed. "Prestige Aviation," a smooth voice answered. "This is Rowan Asherton," I said, speaking fast. "I need a mid-size jet, Hawker or Citation. O'Hare to Blackwood County Private Airstrip. Wheels up in 30 minutes. I will pay a 50% premium." "Ms. Asherton," the broker said, his tone perking up at the mention of the premium. "One moment. Yes, I have a Learjet 45 that just offloaded. We can have it fueled and ready. That will be $18,000, paid up front." "Do it," I said. "Use the visa ending in 4492. I heard the typing on the other end. I held my breath. $18,000 was a painful hit, but the estate was worth $50 million. It was an investment. "Ms. Asherton? The broker's voice had changed. It had lost its warmth. The card was declined. That is impossible, I said. I have a $50,000 limit. Try it again. I did, he said. It is coming back with a do not honor code. It usually means the bank has flagged the account for suspicious activity. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. Suspicious activity. I hung up on the broker and frantically opened my banking app. I logged in with my thumbprint. Account status, frozen. Reason, joint holder request, potential identity theft reported. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring. When I was 22, freshly graduated, I had opened this account. My father had co-signed to help me get a better interest rate. I had never removed him. I had forgotten he was even on it. He had never touched it, until today. He had walked into a bank branch, or called a private banker he knew, and claimed that his daughter's identity had been compromised. He had frozen my assets. I was stranded in Chicago. I had no ticket. I had no plane. And now, I had no money. I slumped against the wall, sliding down until I was crouching on the floor. I hugged the briefcase to my chest. The sheer magnitude of their coordination was terrifying. They had checkmated me. They had thought of everything. My phone chimed again. A text message. It was not from Harold. It was from my mother. Or rather, my stepmother. Elena. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the screen. Then I opened it. It was a photograph. They were standing on the steps of the Blackwood County Courthouse. The sky behind them was a piercing, innocent blue. My father was wearing his lucky navy suit, the one he wore when he won big cases. Elena was in a modest cream dress, clutching a pearl necklace. They were smiling. Not the predatory smiles I knew, but sad, brave smiles. The kind of smiles you wear when you are grieving a father and a troubled daughter. The caption read, "We are so sorry you are unwell. Rowan, we are doing this to protect you. Go home and get some rest. We will handle the heavy lifting." Something inside me snapped. It was not a loud snap. It was the quiet, metallic sound of a safety latch being disengaged. They thought they had won because they had cut off my resources. They thought I was defined by my platinum credit card and my pristine travel itinerary. They thought that without the trappings of my civilized life, I would crumble. They forgot that I was an auditor. I spent my life looking for the things people tried to hide. I spent my life digging through the trash of corporate America to find the truth. I did not need luxury. I needed a vehicle. I stood up. I smoothed my skirt. I picked up the briefcase. I was done playing by the rules. The rules were for people who could afford to lose. I turned and looked down the long corridor of Terminal 3. The signage indicated that the passenger gates were to the left, to the right, down a long, sterile hallway that led to the service elevators. Was the signage for cargo and logistics? I started to walk. Then I started to jog. Then I was running. I ran past the confused travelers. I ran past the duty-free shops selling overpriced perfume. I burst through the double doors marked Authorized Personnel Only. Ignoring the alarm that chirped briefly, I found myself in the concrete bowels of the airport. It smelled of diesel fuel and unwashed bodies. Forklifts beeped in the distance. I had to find Building C. That was where Jack Reynolds operated his transport company. Red Eye Logistics. I navigated the maze of corridors. My forensic brain recalling the layout from the audit I had done 3 years ago. Turn left at the catering kitchen, down the ramp, across the loading dock. I burst out into the cold Chicago air. The wind whipped my hair across my face. I was on the tarmac level, but far away from the sleek passenger jets. Here, the planes were old, scarred beasts. I saw it, a corrugated metal hangar with a faded red sign. I ran toward it, dodging a luggage tug. My lungs were burning. My feet, blistered in my heels, screamed in protest. I did not stop. I reached the side door of the hangar and pounded on it with my fist. "Jack!" I screamed, my voice lost in the roar of a jet engine nearby. "Jack!" The door swung open. Jack Reynolds stood there. He looked exactly as I remembered. A bear of a man with grease stains on his coveralls and a cigar unlit in the corner of his mouth. He looked at me, disheveled, panting, clutching a briefcase like a life preserver. He looked at my feet. He looked at the desperation in my eyes. "You forgot the coffee," he rumbled. "My dad froze my accounts," I gasped, leaning against the doorframe, fighting to catch my breath. "He canceled my tickets. He is stealing the estate. I have $0. Jack, I have nothing but this briefcase and a promise that if you get me to Montana, I will owe you a favor that makes the last one look like a tip." Jack looked past me. Scanning the tarmac to see if I had brought heat with me, he saw nothing but the gray runway. He spat the unlit cigar onto the ground. "I don't need money," Jack said, wiping his hands on a rag. "I need a co-pilot who knows how to read a manifesto so I don't get fined by the EPA again." He stepped back and jerked his thumb toward the interior of the hangar. "You ever flown in a Cessna Caravan with a bad heater?" he asked. "I would fly on a kite if it got me there," I said, stepping inside. "Good," Jack said, closing the door and sealing out the cold. "Because where we are going, the turbulence is going to be worse than the audit." I followed him into the gloom of the hangar. In the center sat the plane. It was small. It was ugly. It looked like a lawnmower with wings. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I checked my watch. 11 o'clock. 2 hours to cover 1,500 miles. The math was impossible. The physics were doubtful. "Strap in, auditor," Jack yelled. Climbing into the cockpit, I climbed into the passenger seat, throwing my briefcase into the back among crates of what looked like auto parts. I pulled the harness tight across my chest. My phone buzzed one last time. A text from Harold. "Judge is seating the court. Where are you?" I did not reply. I switched the phone to airplane mode. My parents wanted a war? They were about to get a blitzkrieg from the sky. The Cessna Caravan was not a mode of transportation. It was a torture device with wings. If my usual seat in first class was a womb of silence and hot towels, the cargo hold of Jack's plane was the belly of a beast digesting bolts and scrap metal. There was no pressurization to pop my ears gently. There was no climate control, only the freezing draft leaking through the door seals and the scorching heat radiating from the single turboprop engine. I sat strapped to a fold-down jump seat that offered the ergonomic support of a park bench. Beside me, secured with heavy-duty cargo nets, were 6 wooden crates stamped industrial hydraulic pumps. They smelled of grease and raw pine. The vibration was so intense that my teeth chattered if I didn't clench my jaw. I looked down at my skirt, once a pristine pencil cut from Italian wool, now smeared with a streak of black oil from when I had climbed aboard. My stockings were torn at the knee. My hair, usually pulled back in a severe architectural bun, was whipping around my face in the drafts like a nest of snakes. I was Rowan Asherton, a woman who fired people for using the wrong font on a financial statement, and I was currently hitchhiking through the stratosphere in a flying dump truck. "How are we doing on time?" I screamed over the roar of the engine. I had to lean forward, shouting toward the cockpit where Jack sat, wrestling with the yoke. Jack tapped the headset on his ear, signaling he couldn't hear me, or perhaps he just didn't want to answer. He pointed to the altimeter and then to the horizon. I looked out the scratched plexiglass window. The landscape below was a blur of brown and green, the flatlands of the Midwest giving way to the rising swell of the plains. We were moving, but it felt agonizingly slow. A commercial jet cruises at 500 miles per hour. This tin can was doing maybe 180. I checked my watch. 11:30. We had 90 minutes to cover a distance that required a miracle. I pulled my laptop from my briefcase. The battery was at 40%. I had no charger. I balanced the computer on my knees, trying to stabilize it against the violent shuddering of the airframe. "Jack, turn on the satellite uplink," I yelled. Jack reached up and flipped a toggle switch on the overhead panel. "It is spotty. Rowan, do not try to stream a movie." I did not want a movie. I wanted justice. I waited for the Wi-Fi icon to stop searching. It connected. One weak bar of signal beaming up to a satellite somewhere in the cold void of space. It was slow, reminiscent of the dial-up internet from my childhood, but it was enough. I opened a blank document. My fingers hovered over the keys. I needed to draft an emergency affidavit. In legal terms, this is a sworn statement of fact used to justify a sudden motion. I needed to explain to Judge Holloway why the plaintiff, me, was not in his courtroom. I began to type, my fingers flying as I compensated for the turbulence. State of Montana, County of Blackwood, in re the estate of Arthur Asherton. Affidavit of Rowan Asherton regarding involuntary detention and obstruction of justice. I wrote with the cold precision of a surgeon. I detailed the arrival at O'Hare. I detailed the false alarm. I detailed the detention by Agent Miller. I described the fake medical report. I reached into the side pocket of my bag and pulled out the incident report Miller had given me. I held it up to the plane's window, using the harsh sunlight to illuminate it, and snapped a photo with my phone. I transferred the image to my laptop and embedded it into the document. Exhibit A, Department of Homeland Security release form, indicating no threat found and confirming receipt of malicious false tip. It was a masterpiece of legal defense. It proved that my absence was not negligence. It was the result of a crime committed by the defendants. I converted the file to a PDF. I opened my email client. The connection lagged. The spinning wheel on the screen mocked me. Sending, I held my breath. The progress bar crept forward. 10%? 50%? The plane dropped suddenly, dropping 50 feet in a stomach-churning air pocket. My laptop slid, and I barely caught it before it hit the metal floor. "Sorry," Jack yelled back. "Thermals are getting rough." I glared at the back of his head and looked at the screen. Sent, I let out a cry of triumph that was instantly swallowed by the engine noise. I had done it. I had filed the excuse. Even if I was late. The clerk would see this. The judge would have to grant a recess. Ping, a notification sound, a new email in my inbox. It was from Clerk of Court _ Blackwood County. My heart soared. They had received it. They were reading it. I opened the email. Automatic reply. Thank you for your correspondence. Please be advised that pursuant to Local Court Rule 7-3, the clerk's office does not accept electronic filings or evidentiary submissions on the day of a scheduled hearing. All motions and exhibits must be submitted in person or by courier to the bailiff before the docket is called. This email account is not monitored during court sessions. I stared at the screen. The words blurred. Not accepted. In person. I slammed the laptop shut. The sound like a gunshot in the cabin. I screamed. It was a primal, frustration-filled sound that tore at my throat. "Everything okay back there?" Jack's voice crackled over the intercom speaker. He had finally decided to switch on. "No!" I yelled at the ceiling of the fuselage. "The system is archaic. They need paper. They need me there. Jack, physically standing in the room." "Well, that might be a problem," Jack said. His voice had lost its usual cavalier edge. "Why?" I unbuckled my seatbelt, ignoring the safety light, and scrambled on my hands and knees toward the cockpit. I grabbed the back of his seat. "Why is that a problem, Jack?" Jack pointed out the front windshield. "Look." I looked. Ahead of us, the horizon was no longer blue. It was a wall of charcoal gray, massive. Bruising clouds were stacking up against the jagged teeth of the Rocky Mountains like an invading army. Lightning flashed inside the clouds, illuminating them from within like paper lanterns in a nightmare. "The front moved faster than the forecast," Jack said, wrestling the yoke as a gust of wind hit us. "That is a severe thunderstorm cell sitting right over the Blackwood Valley." "Fly over it," I commanded. "I can't," Jack said. "This crate has a service ceiling of 25,000 feet. Those thunderheads top out at 40,000, and I can't go under it because, well, mountains." "So go through it," I said. "You said you fly when others don't." "I fly cargo. Rowan, not suicide missions," Jack said, tapping the radar screen which was painting a terrifying picture of red and purple blobs. "If we go into that core, the updrafts will tear the wings off. I have to divert." "No diversion." I gripped his shoulder. "If we divert, we land in Billings. That is a 3-hour drive. I miss the hearing. I lose everything." "Better to lose the lawsuit than lose your life," Jack said. banking the plane to the left. "You do not understand." I shook him. "This isn't just money. They killed him. Jack, I know they did." Jack froze. He leveled the plane. He turned in his seat to look at me. His eyes searched mine. "What did you say?" "My grandfather," I said, my voice trembling. "They didn't just steal from him. The stress, the medication mix-ups accelerated it, and now they are going to dance on his grave with his own money. I cannot let them win. I cannot." Jack looked at the storm. He looked at the fuel gauge. He looked at me. He sighed, a heavy sound that rattled in his chest. "I know a strip," Jack said slowly. "It is an old crop duster field. It is on the near side of the ridge, about 20 miles from the courthouse. It will be rough. We will be coming in under the ceiling, skirting the edge of the squall line. If the wind shear catches us, we are lawn darts." "Do it," I said without hesitation. Jack grunted. He flipped a switch. "Strap in tight, and I mean tight, if you have a god. Now is a good time to make a conference call." I crawled back to my jump seat. I tightened the straps until they dug into my collarbone. The plane banked hard to the right, aiming straight for the edge of the storm wall. The sky darkened instantly. The sunlight vanished. Rain began to hammer against the metal skin of the fuselage, sounding like a million ball bearings being poured on a tin roof. I closed my eyes. The turbulence hit. It wasn't just shaking. It was violent drops that made my stomach rise into my throat. The crates of hydraulic pumps strained against their nets. I needed an anchor. I needed to remember why I was doing this. I reached for my briefcase. I unzipped it. I pulled out the red folder. The evidence tape was torn. The edges frayed. I opened it. There was no last will and testament inside. There was no flowing legal prose. It was a ledger, a black, leather-bound notebook that smelled of my grandfather's pipe tobacco. I turned the pages. My grandfather, Arthur, had been a meticulous man. He had built a logistics empire from one truck. He noticed details. When he started getting sick. When his mind started to fog. Everyone thought he was losing it. My parents told everyone he was senile. But Arthur Asherton had been playing a long game. I looked at the entry from 3 years ago. The handwriting was shaky but legible. August 4th. Grant requested power of attorney for medical expenses. August 5th. Withdrawal from trust, $50,000. August 6th. Debit, Elite Motors. Purchase of Porsche 911 for transportation needs. I turned the page. December 10th. Elena insisted on changing my pain medication provider. Said the old one was too expensive. December 12th. Withdrawal from trust, $20,000. December 13th. Credit card payment. Neiman Marcus. Note, Elena's new wardrobe for the winter gala. It went on and on. Page after page of theft. They had treated his life savings like a piggy bank while he sat in a room they refused to heat properly. To save on utilities. And then, the final entry, the one that made my blood run cold every time I read it. It was dated 2 days before he died. May 2nd. Grant and Elena discussing the audit. They know Rowan is coming. They are panic-stricken. Heard Grant say, "If she sees the books, we go to jail," Elena said. "Not if the old man isn't around to testify." They gave me a new pill tonight. Blue, not the white one. I did not take it. I hid it under the mattress. But I feel tired, so tired. If I sleep, I might not wake up. If Rowan finds this, she will know what to do. I ran my finger over the ink. He had known. He had been alone, trapped in his own house, surrounded by vultures, and his only weapon was this pen. "I am coming, Grandpa," I whispered into the deafening roar of the storm. The plane lurched violently, dropping sideways. A flash of lightning illuminated the cabin, casting long, dancing shadows. The crates groaned against their restraints. "We are crossing the ridge," Jack yelled over the radio. "Hold on!" I clutched the ledger to my chest. It was not just paper. It was his voice. It was his accusation. And I was the delivery system. The rain intensified. Water was leaking through the door seal now. A fine mist spraying across the cabin. I was cold. I was terrified. And I was nauseous. But as I looked down at the numbers, $10,000, $500,000, $2 million, my fear hardened into something else. It hardened into the cold, diamond-hard fury of an auditor who has found the discrepancy. They thought the storm would stop me. They thought the distance would stop me. They were wrong. I looked out the window. Through a break in the clouds, I saw the jagged peaks of the mountains rushing up to meet us. We were flying low, dangerously low. The trees looked like grasping fingers. "Jack," I yelled, "do not crash. I have to fire a lawyer today." "Working on it," Jack yelled back. The plane shuddered, the engine whining in protest as we fought the downdrafts. This was it, the final approach. I held the ledger tight. If we crashed, if they found my body in the wreckage, they would find this book in my arms. But I did not intend to become wreckage. I intended to become the disaster that hit my parents. "Gear down," Jack shouted. I braced myself. The ground rushed up. The wheels screamed as they made contact with something that was definitely not a paved runway. We bounced. We skidded. Mud sprayed up against the windows. The plane fishtailed, the tail swinging wildly. "Brakes!" Jack roared. I was thrown forward against the harness. The breath knocked out of me. The plane shuddered, slid sideways, and finally, with a groan of stressed metal, came to a halt. Silence. Then, the sound of rain hammering on the roof. "We are down," Jack panted. "We are alive." I unbuckled my harness with trembling hands. I grabbed my bag. I grabbed the ledger. "Open the door." "Jack," I said. "I have a hearing to catch." The wheels of the Cessna had barely stopped churning up the mud of the makeshift runway before I kicked the door open. The wind hit me instantly, a freezing gust coming off the Rockies that carried the scent of pine needles and ozone. We were on the ground, but we were in the middle of nowhere. This was not an airport. It was a strip of flattened grass next to a corrugated metal shed that smelled strongly of fertilizer. "Jack, the car!" I yelled, jumping down from the cabin. My heels sank 2 inches into the sodden earth. I didn't care. I ruined the shoes hours ago. Jack Reynolds slid out of the cockpit, landing with a heavy thud. He pointed toward a lean-to structure attached to the shed. Underneath it sat a vehicle that looked like it had survived a war, or perhaps several harsh Montana winters, which was essentially the same thing. It was a Ford F-150 pickup truck. The paint was a peeling mosaic of rust and faded blue. The bumper was held on with baling wire. It was the only vehicle in sight. "That belongs to Old Man Miller, who owns this strip," Jack shouted over the wind. "He keeps the keys under the mat." "I am taking it," I said, sprinting toward the truck. "Rowan, that thing has 200,000 miles on it," Jack warned, jogging after me. "And the brakes are a suggestion, not a command." "I do not need brakes," I shouted back, yanking the driver's side door open. It groaned in protest, a screech of dry metal on metal. "I need acceleration." I threw my briefcase onto the passenger seat. It landed with a heavy thump, the black ledger inside hitting the dashboard. I lifted the rubber floor mat. The keys were there, silver and cold. I jammed the key into the ignition and turned it. The engine sputtered, coughed, and then roared to life with a sound like a chainsaw cutting through gravel. The muffler was clearly gone. "Go get him, Tiger," Jack yelled, slapping the hood. "I will square it with Miller." I shifted the gear stick into drive. It clunked violently. I stomped on the gas pedal. The rear tires spun in the mud, slinging dirt onto Jack's coveralls. Before finding traction, the truck lurched forward, fishtailing onto the gravel access road that led toward the highway. I checked the dashboard clock. It was broken, frozen at 4:30. I checked my watch. It was 12 o'clock, noon. Exactly. I had 60 minutes. The courthouse in Blackwood was 100 miles away. Do the math. Rowan, distance equals rate multiplied by time. To make it by 1 o'clock, I needed to average 100 miles per hour on a winding mountain highway. In a truck that shook when it hit 60, in the rain, it was statistically impossible. "Watch me," I whispered to the empty cab. I hit the tarmac of State Highway 19 and floored it. The speedometer needle began a slow, trembling climb, 50, 60, 70. The steering wheel vibrated in my hands, sending tremors up my arms to my shoulders. The wind roared through the gaps in the window seals. I needed to multitask. I could not just drive. I had to prepare the battlefield. I grabbed my phone. I jammed it into the plastic cup holder, which was sticky with years of spilled soda. I tapped the speakerphone button. The roar of the engine was deafening, so I grabbed my earbuds from my pocket. Disentangling the wires with one hand while steering with the other, I shoved them into my ears. I dialed the number for the clerk of the court. Blackwood County. I had memorized it 3 days ago. Ring, ring, ring. Clerk's office, Blackwood County Courthouse. This is Maria Gonzalez speaking. Her voice was clipped, efficient, and utterly devoid of patience. I knew the type. She was the gatekeeper. She had seen every excuse, heard every lie, and she prided herself on being the immovable object. "Ms. Gonzalez," I shouted to be heard over the engine noise. "This is Rowan Asherton. I am the plaintiff in the Asherton estate hearing scheduled for 1 o'clock in Judge Halloway's courtroom." "Ms. Asherton," Gonzalez replied, her tone dropping a few degrees. "We have not received your check-in. The bailiff is preparing to call the docket. You need to be physically present in chambers to be marked as attending." "I am en route," I said, swerving to avoid a pothole the size of a dinner plate. The truck bounced hard, the suspension groaning. "I have encountered severe, unavoidable delays due to a security incident at O'Hare and weather conditions here. I am requesting a brief recess or a delay of 30 minutes to allow for my arrival." "Ms. Asherton," Gonzalez cut in, her voice sharp. "Judge Halloway is a stickler for time. We have a full docket today. If you are not here when the gavel bangs, the defense moves for a default judgment. We cannot hold a courtroom open because you missed a flight. The weather report was available yesterday. You should have planned accordingly." She was reciting the script. To her, I was just another irresponsible rich girl who couldn't manage a calendar. I looked at the road ahead. A semi-truck was laboring up the incline. I checked the oncoming lane. Clear. I jerked the wheel to the left, crossing the double yellow line. The Ford screamed as I pushed it past 80 miles per hour. Overtaking the semi, the driver honked a long, angry blast. "I did not miss my flight, Ms. Gonzalez," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding my veins. "I was detained." "We do not accept traffic stops as a valid excuse," she said, sounding bored. "Unless you are in the hospital or jail, the hearing proceeds." "I am not talking about a traffic ticket," I snapped. "I am talking about a felony committed against a witness." I needed to escalate this. I needed to speak her language, the language of bureaucracy, the language of forms, stamps, and authority. "I am officially reporting an act of judicial interference pursuant to Federal Code Title 18, Section 1512. I enunciated clearly. I was detained by the Department of Homeland Security at O'Hare International Airport based on a malicious and falsified report filed by the defendants in this case. Silence on the other end. The boredom vanished. "I am holding a federal incident report stamped by the DHS," I continued, pressing my advantage. "Do you have a pen, Ms. Gonzalez? Because I am going to give you the badge number of the special agent in charge and the federal case file number regarding the false tip. If Judge Halloway rules in default while a federal investigation into witness tampering is active, he will be party to a mistrial appeal that will drag this county through the mud for the next 5 years. "I have a pen," Gonzalez said. Her voice was no longer dismissive. It was cautious. "Go ahead." "Special Agent Miller, badge number 4922 Alpha, case file number DHS Chi 7709. The report confirms that a caller posing as my doctor claimed I was carrying stolen government documents to prevent me from boarding my flight." I took a curve at 75 miles per hour. The back end of the truck slid out on the wet asphalt. I counter-steered, fighting the skid. The tires caught. I straightened out. My heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but my voice remained ice cold. I am currently driving a rental vehicle through the storm to get to your courtroom, I said. I will be there, but if the judge rules before I walk through those doors, he needs to know exactly why I was not in my seat. I heard the sound of typing on the other end. Gonzalez was looking something up. Ms. Asherton, Gonzalez said slowly. You said the caller claimed to be your doctor? Yes, I said. A fake doctor. My stepmother posing as a psychiatrist. That is interesting, Gonzalez said. The tone was strange. It wasn't skepticism. It was recognition. Why is that interesting, Ms. Gonzalez? I asked. Because, she said, the rustle of papers coming through the line. Mr. Vane, the attorney for your parents, just filed a motion with the court about 20 minutes ago. It is sitting on the judge's desk right now. What motion? I demanded. A motion for emergency conservatorship, Gonzalez read, and a request to proceed in absentia due to the medical incapacity of the plaintiff. My foot involuntarily pressed harder on the gas. The speedometer touched 95. The engine whined like a dying animal. What evidence did they submit? I asked, though I already knew the answer. The sickness in my stomach was heavier than the G-force of the turns. They submitted an affidavit stating that you are currently admitted to a voluntary rehabilitation facility in Illinois for severe mental instability, Gonzalez said. They claim you signed a power of attorney over to your father this morning to handle the estate matters while you recover. I nearly drove off the road. They had not just tried to stop me, they had tried to erase me. They are lying, I choked out. I am not in rehab. I am in a pickup truck on Highway 19. I did not sign anything. The document looks authentic, Ms. Asherton, Gonzalez said, her voice dropping to a whisper. It has a notarized signature. It says you recognized your breakdown and sought help. If the judge sees this, and you are not here to refute it, he will grant the conservatorship. He will appoint your parents as your guardians. The full horror of their plan crystallized in my mind. If they won today, they wouldn't just get the $50 million. They would get control over me. They would have the legal right to commit me, to medicate me, to access my bank accounts, to make decisions about my life. They were using the manic episode narrative they planted at the airport to build a legal cage around me. Grant Asherton was not just a thief. He was a monster. He was willing to lobotomize his own daughter's life to cover his crimes. Listen to me, Ms. Gonzalez, I said, my voice trembling with a rage so pure it felt like white heat. That document is a forgery, just like the tip to Homeland Security was a forgery. It is a coordinated attack. Do not let the judge sign that order. Do not let him bang that gavel. I am just the clerk, Ms. Asherton, Gonzalez said. I cannot stop the proceedings. The session starts in 30 minutes. You have to be here. If you walk through those doors, their motion falls apart. If you don't, the paper speaks for you. I will be there, I promised. I will be there if I have to drive this truck through the wall. Drive safe, Gonzalez said. And the line went dead. I threw the phone onto the passenger seat. I looked at the road. The rain was coming down in sheets now, turning the world into a gray blur. The wipers on the old Ford were smearing the water rather than clearing it. 30 minutes, 50 miles left. I was doing 100 miles per hour in a 30-year-old truck on a wet mountain road. I thought about my grandfather. I thought about the pills they forced him to take. I thought about the rehab they had planned for me, probably some locked facility where they would drug me until I couldn't remember my own name. Let alone the account numbers in the black ledger. I gripped the steering wheel until my leather gloves creaked. Not today, I screamed at the windshield. Not today! I saw a sign for a hairpin turn ahead. Recommended speed, 25 miles per hour. I didn't touch the brakes. I downshifted, forcing the transmission to scream. using the engine compression to slow the truck just enough to keep the tires on the pavement. The rear end swung out, sliding toward the guardrail and the 1,000-foot drop beyond. I steered into the slide. The truck drifted, the tires howling in agony, the mud flaps scraping the metal rail with a shower of sparks. I held it. The truck straightened out. I slammed the gas again. My parents wanted to paint me as unstable. They wanted to say I was having a breakdown. Fine. I would bring them a breakdown. I would bring them the kind of storm that tears houses off their foundations. I checked the time. 12:35. I could see the valley floor below through the breaks in the trees. I could see the tiny cluster of buildings that was Blackwood. I was coming, and I was bringing hell with me, while I was fighting a physical war against hydroplaning tires and a disintegrating suspension on a mountain pass. A very different, yet equally violent war was being waged inside the climate-controlled sanctity of the Blackwood County Courthouse. Inside courtroom 4B, the air smelled of floor wax and old mahogany. It was a smell designed to intimidate, to remind everyone that the law was ancient and heavy. Judge Holloway sat on the bench, a man whose face was etched with the deep lines of someone who had spent 40 years listening to people lie. He checked his watch. It was 12:45. His stomach rumbled. He had a tea time at the club at 3 o'clock, provided the rain stopped, and he had very little patience for family squabbles that ran into his lunch hour. The plaintiff's table was empty. A single leather chair sat vacant, turning slightly on its swivel base, a stark visual representation of Rowan Asherton's absence. Harold, my grandfather's attorney, looked small in the cavernous room. He was a good man, an honest estate lawyer who drafted wills and handled property closings. He was not a litigator, he was certainly not a shark, and right now, he was bleeding into the water. He kept checking his phone under the table, praying for a text, a call, a miracle. There was nothing. On the other side of the aisle, the defense table was a masterclass in optics. Grant Asherton sat with his shoulders hunched forward, a posture carefully calibrated to suggest a heavy burden carried with dignity. He wore his Navy suit, the one he had worn to my high school graduation, the one he wore to charity galas. He did not look like a man who had just frozen his daughter's bank accounts. He looked like a father who had not slept in weeks, beside him. Elena clutched a lace handkerchief. She was not crying, which would have been too theatrical. Instead, she dabbed at the corners of her eyes with a stoic resolve, occasionally squeezing Grant's hand for support. They were perfect. They were the grieving son and the devoted daughter-in-law, forced into a legal battle they claimed to despise. Standing before the bench was their attorney, Julian Vane. Vane was a man who wore suits that cost more than Harold's car. He moved with the fluid, predatory grace of a jungle cat. He did not speak to the judge. He purred. "Your Honor," Vane said, his voice smooth and rich, filling the silence of the room. "We have waited 45 minutes. My clients have been dragged through the mud by these frivolous filings. They are grieving the loss of Arthur Asherton, a pioneer of this community. And now, they are being forced to sit here and watch an empty chair." Judge Holloway peered over his reading glasses. "Mr. Harold, where is your client? You assured the court she would be present." Harold stood up, his hands shaking slightly as he adjusted his tie. "Your Honor, as I stated, Ms. Asherton has encountered significant travel difficulties. We believe there has been a misunderstanding with federal security at O'Hare." Vane chuckled softly. It was a low, dismissive sound that invited the judge to share in the joke. "A misunderstanding," Vane repeated, turning to face the gallery before looking back at the judge. "That is one word for it. However, we have a different explanation, one that brings us no joy to present." Vane walked back to his table and picked up a document. He held it like it was a sacred text. "Your Honor, we have just received this affidavit from the Illinois State Police and the medical director of the Meadows Psychiatric Facility," Vane lied, his voice dropping to a somber register. "It appears that Ms. Asherton was indeed detained at the airport, but not for a misunderstanding. She was detained because she suffered a severe manic episode in the terminal. She was raving about government conspiracies and stolen documents. She was deemed a danger to herself, Harold gasped. Objection. That is completely unverified. We have no record of this. The document is notarized, Your Honor, Vane countered smoothly, sliding the paper up to the bench. Ms. Asherton has a history of high-functioning instability. The death of her grandfather was the trigger. My clients, her own parents, have been trying to get her help for months. This lawsuit, this obsession with the audit, it is not based on fact. It is a symptom of her paranoia. Judge Holloway picked up the paper. He read the forged medical intake form. He read the fabricated police statement. He looked at Grant Asherton. Grant looked up at the judge, his eyes wet with unshed tears. We just want her safe, Your Honor, Grant said, his voice cracking perfectly on the word safe. We do not care about the money. The estate can sit in trust forever for all I care. I just do not want my little girl running around the country thinking she is a federal agent. Please, let us take care of her. It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award. It preyed on the judge's paternal instincts. It painted me not as a crusader for truth, but as a sick child who needed to be managed. Meanwhile, 15 miles away, the sick child was currently screaming obscenities at a load of cedar logs. I was trapped. The road, Highway 19, had narrowed to a single lane as it wound along the cliffs of the Blackwood River Gorge. To my right was a sheer wall of granite. To my left was a flimsy guardrail and a 300-foot drop into the churning whitewater below. And directly in front of me, occupying the entire width of the asphalt, was a logging truck. It was a behemoth. 18 wheels throwing up a wall of dirty spray that coated my windshield faster than the wipers could clear it. It was moving at a crawl, 20 miles per hour. Move! I screamed, slamming my hand against the steering wheel. The horn of the Ford F-150 let out a pathetic, strangled bleat that was instantly swallowed by the roar of the truck's diesel engine. I checked the dashboard. 12:50, 10 minutes. I had 10 minutes to cover 15 miles. At this speed, I would arrive at 1:30. By then, Vane would be buying drinks, and I would be a ward of the state. I leaned out the window, the rain stinging my face like needles. I tried to see past the logs. The road was a series of blind curves, twisting like a wounded snake. Double yellow lines stretched out endlessly. I pulled back in, shivering. The heater in the truck was blowing cold air. Think, Rowan, I commanded myself. Calculate the risk. Risk analysis. Option A. Stay behind the truck. Result. 100% probability of missing the hearing. 100% probability of losing the estate. 100% probability of being placed under conservatorship. Option B. Pass on a blind curve in the rain. Result. 50% probability of a head-on collision. 50% probability of death. But 50% chance of survival was better than a 0% chance of freedom. I downshifted. The engine roared. I crept closer to the steel bumper of the logging truck, close enough to read the mud-caked license plate. Back in the courtroom, the noose was tightening. Judge Holloway set the paper down. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Mr. Harold, the judge said, his voice heavy with finality. This court is sympathetic to your position, but the evidence presented by Mr. Vane is compelling. If your client is indeed in medical custody, or worse, wandering the streets in a delusional state, this court has a duty to protect her interests. She is not delusional, Harold argued, but his voice lacked conviction. He was looking at the empty chair, wondering if maybe, just maybe, he had been wrong. Maybe Rowan was crazy. She had been so intense, so obsessive about the numbers. The law requires the plaintiff to prosecute their case, Vane interjected. Ms. Asherton is not here. She has abandoned her claim. Furthermore, given her mental state, she lacks the capacity to manage the estate, even if she were here. Vane walked back to his table and placed a hand on Grant's shoulder. My clients are filing an emergency motion for conservatorship over the person and property of Rowan Asherton. They are her next of kin. They are the only ones who can authorize the medical treatment she desperately needs. Elena let out a small sob. We just want to bring her home. Judge Holloway nodded. He reached for his gavel. He reached for his pen. I am inclined to agree, the judge said, in the absence of the plaintiff and in light of the medical affidavit. I am dismissing the plaintiff's challenge to the will. Furthermore, I am granting the temporary conservatorship order effective immediately. Wait, Harold cried out. Your Honor, please, give her 10 more minutes. She called the clerk. She said she was on the road. The clerk said she claimed to be a victim of a government conspiracy, Vane said dryly, which only proves the diagnosis, does it not? The judge hesitated. He looked at the clock. 12:55. 5 minutes, Judge Holloway said, his eyes hard. I will give her until the hand hits the 12. If she is not in this room, I am signing the order. I did not know about the 5 minutes. I only knew that the road had briefly straightened out for 100 yards before disappearing around a massive rock outcropping. It was now or never. The logging truck was spewing black smoke. The spray was blinding. I gripped the wheel. My palms were sweating inside my gloves. Grandpa, I whispered, if you are watching, push the oncoming cars out of the way. I slammed the gas pedal to the floor. The Ford F-150 did not accelerate smoothly. It convulsed. It leaped forward with a shudder that felt like the transmission was ripping itself apart. I yanked the wheel to the left. I crossed the double yellow line. I was in the oncoming lane. The wall of logs rushed past my passenger window. It seemed to go on forever. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. I was alongside the cab of the truck now. I looked up. The driver, a bearded man in a trucker hat, looked down at me. His eyes went wide. He blasted his air horn, a deafening sound that shook my bones. He was signaling me, warning me. There was a car coming. I saw the headlights cut through the rain. A silver sedan. Rounding the curve ahead, coming straight at me. Time dilated. It slowed down to a crawl. I saw the horrified expression of the driver in the sedan. I saw the grill of the logging truck beside me. I saw the gap narrowing. I did not brake. Braking meant death. If I braked, I would slide under the wheels of the logging truck. I had to accelerate. Come on, I screamed, pushing the pedal so hard my foot hurt. Move, the old engine screamed. The tachometer redlined. The truck surged forward, fighting the wind, fighting the drag. I cleared the front bumper of the logging truck. I yanked the wheel hard to the right. The back end of my truck clipped the front fender of the logging truck with a metallic crunch. The impact sent me into a fishtail. The silver sedan flashed past, its horn blaring, missing my rear bumper by inches. I wrestled the steering wheel, my arms crossing over each other, fighting the hydroplane. The truck slid sideways across the lane, the tires howling. I saw the guardrail. I saw the drop. Then, the tires bit into the asphalt. The truck straightened. I was ahead. I was alive. I checked the mirror. The logging truck and the sedan were receding into the gray mist behind me. I checked the clock. 12:58. I could see the town limit sign. Blackwood. Population 2,000. I tore through the main street. I blew through the only stoplight in town, ignoring the red light. A pedestrian jumped back onto the curb, dropping his umbrella. The courthouse was ahead. It was a brick building with white pillars, sitting on a hill at the end of the street. I drove up the lawn. I did not bother with the parking lot. I drove the Ford F-150 straight up the manicured grass of the courthouse square. I slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded through a bed of petunias and came to a halt 3 feet from the bottom of the marble steps. Steam hissed from the radiator. The engine died with a final, rattling cough. I kicked the door open. I grabbed the briefcase. My hair was wild. My face was pale. My suit was ruined. I had no shoes on. I had kicked them off to drive better. I ran up the steps, 2 at a time. My bare feet slapped against the wet marble. Inside the courtroom, the second hand on the wall clock ticked. Tick, tick, tick. It hit the 12. Judge Holloway sighed. He picked up his pen. He positioned the tip of the pen on the signature line of the order that would end my life as a free woman. Let the record show, the judge intoned, that the plaintiff has failed to appear. The motion is granted. Grant Asherton smiled. It was a small, victorious smile. He reached out to shake Vane's hand, and then the double doors at the back of the courtroom exploded open. They didn't just open, they slammed against the oak paneling with a crack like thunder that echoed off the high ceiling. Every head in the room turned. I stood there, framed by the doorway, chest heaving, water dripping from my clothes onto the floor. I held the briefcase up like a weapon. "Objection!" I screamed, my voice raw but filling every corner of the room. Grant's smile froze. Elena dropped her handkerchief. Vane looked as if he had swallowed a lemon. Judge Holloway stopped, his pen hovering millimeters above the paper. He looked up, peering over his glasses at the wild, drenched creature standing in his courtroom. "I am here," I gasped, walking down the center aisle, leaving wet, muddy footprints on the carpet. "I am Rowan Asherton, and I am not late. I am just in time." The clock on the wall above the judge's bench read 5 minutes past 1. The echo of the double doors slamming against the mahogany paneling seemed to vibrate through the very foundations of the building, a thunderclap that shattered the sterile, hushed atmosphere of the courtroom. The air, previously thick with the scent of floor wax and the stale perfume of legal bureaucracy, was suddenly pierced by the smell of ozone, diesel fuel, and mountain rain that swirled around me like a cape. Judge Holloway sat frozen on the bench. His hand was poised, the gold nib of his fountain pen hovering mere millimeters above the signature line of the conservatorship order. A single drop of ink fell from the pen, landing on the paper with a finality that made my stomach lurch. It missed the signature line by a fraction of an inch. The silence that followed was absolute. It was not the respectful silence of a church. It was the terrified silence of a prey animal realizing the predator has entered the clearing. I stood at the back of the center aisle, my chest heaving, my lungs burning as if I had inhaled broken glass. I knew exactly what I looked like. I had caught a glimpse of my reflection in the glass of the door as I burst through. I looked like a banshee. My Italian wool suit, usually an armor of corporate perfection, was sodden and stained with grease from the cargo plane. My skirt was torn at the hem. My hair, freed from its pins, hung in wild, wet tangles around a face that was pale and streaked with mud. And I was barefoot. My feet, cold and bruised, gripped the plush carpet of the aisle. But while my body was a wreck, my mind was a diamond, cold, hard, and unbreakable. I looked at the defense table. Grant Asherton, my father, had turned in his chair. The mask of the grieving, burdened patriarch had slipped. His face was not pale. It was gray, the color of wet ash. His mouth hung slightly open, his eyes wide and unblinking, as if he were trying to process a data error in reality itself. He was looking at a ghost. He was looking at a problem he had spent $10,000 and considerable influence to erase, and yet, here I was, breathing his air. Beside him, Elena had stopped dabbing her eyes. Her hand was frozen halfway to her mouth, the lace handkerchief crumpling in her grip. Her eyes darted from me to the judge, then to the side exit, calculating, always calculating. "Objection," I repeated, my voice lower this time, but steadier. It scraped against my throat, raw from screaming over the roar of the Cessna's engine, but it carried the undeniable weight of authority. "I object to this entire proceeding." "Bailiff!" Julian Vane, the lawyer for my parents, shrieked. His smooth baritone purr cracked into a high-pitched tenor. He jumped to his feet, knocking his chair back. "Seize this woman! She is violent. She is a danger to the court." The bailiff, a large man with a belt full of tactical gear, stepped into the aisle, blocking my path. He rested his hand on his taser. "Ma'am," the bailiff barked, his voice booming, "you need to stop right there. Put your hands where I can see them." I did not stop. I did not slow down. I walked straight toward him, my bare feet making no sound on the carpet. I locked eyes with him. I did not look at him with fear. I looked at him with the same expression I used when a CEO tried to deny me access to his private ledger. "Officer," I said, my voice cutting through the tension, "I am the plaintiff. I am the legal owner of the estate being discussed, and unless you have a warrant for my arrest that is not based on a fabricated phone call from that woman sitting right there, you will step aside and let me approach the bench." I pointed a shaking finger at Elena without breaking eye contact with the bailiff. The bailiff hesitated. He looked at the judge. He looked at me. He saw the mud, yes, but he also saw the posture. He saw the spine of steel. He saw the terrifying clarity in my eyes. "Stand down, deputy," Judge Holloway said. His voice was quiet, but it commanded the room. He capped his pen and set it down. He leaned forward, peering over his spectacles, his gaze traveling over my ruined appearance with a mixture of shock and fascination. "Ms. Asherton?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said, stepping past the stunned bailiff. I walked to the front of the courtroom. I could feel the heat radiating from my parents as I passed their table. I could hear Grant's jagged breathing. I did not look at them. They did not deserve my gaze. Not yet. I reached the plaintiff's table, where Harold, my grandfather's lawyer, was staring at me with his mouth agape. He looked like he wanted to hug me or faint. I wasn't sure which. "I apologize for my appearance, Your Honor," I said, gripping the edge of the table to steady my trembling legs. "And for my tardiness. It takes a considerable amount of effort to travel 1,500 miles when the defendants have canceled your flights, frozen your bank accounts, and placed you on a federal no-fly list." "Your Honor!" Vane shouted. Regaining his composure, he smoothed his tie, trying to reassert control over the narrative. "This is exactly what we were talking about. Look at her. She is rambling about conspiracies. She is disheveled. She is barefoot. She is clearly in the midst of a psychotic break. This behavior only confirms the affidavit we just submitted." Vane turned to me, his face twisting into a mask of faux sympathy. "Rowan, please, we want to help you. You need medication. You need rest." I turned to look at Vane. I let a small, cold smile touch my lips. It was the smile of a hunter who has just heard the trap snap shut. "Mr. Vane," I said softly, "I do not need medication. I need a shower. And I need you to stop talking before you add perjury to your list of ethical violations." I turned back to the judge. I opened my briefcase. The leather was stained with rain, but the interior was dry. I pulled out the document I had fought the storm to deliver. The Federal Incident Report. The red stamp of the Department of Homeland Security was bright and angry against the white paper. I walked up to the bench. The bailiff tensed, but the judge raised a hand to stay him. I slammed the paper down on the judge's desk. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "This," I said, my voice ringing with clarity, "is an official incident report from the Department of Homeland Security, issued at 10:30 this morning at O'Hare International Airport. It details my detention based on an anonymous tip claiming I was a terrorist carrying stolen government secrets." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I unlocked it and placed it on the bench next to the paper. "And this," I continued, "is a recording of that anonymous tip, provided to me by the federal agents who realized they were being used as pawns in a civil dispute. The caller claims to be a Dr. Alistair Thorne, but if the court listens closely, they will hear the voice of Elena Asherton speaking through a handkerchief." "Lies!" Elena screeched. It was the first time she had spoken. Her voice was shrill, shattering her carefully constructed persona of the demure, grieving daughter-in-law. "He is hallucinating. That is not real. The Department of Homeland Security does not hallucinate. Mrs. Asherton," I said, not turning around. "And neither does the forensic voice analysis they are currently running on that recording." Judge Holloway looked at the paper. He picked it up. His eyes scanned the header. He saw the federal seal. He saw the signature of Special Agent Miller. He saw the timestamp. He looked at the motion Vane had filed, the one claiming I was in a rehab facility in Illinois at this very moment. He looked back at me. A woman standing in front of him, covered in Montana mud, holding proof that she had been in Chicago 3 hours ago. The contradiction was physical. It was absolute. "Mr. Vane," Judge Holloway said. His voice was dangerously low. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You submitted a sworn affidavit stating your client's daughter was currently admitted to a facility called The Meadows. You stated she had signed a voluntary commitment order this morning." "We were informed," Vane stammered. He was sweating now. I could see the sheen of perspiration on his forehead. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that his clients had not told him the whole truth. Or perhaps he was just realizing that he had bet on the wrong horse. "If she is in rehab," the judge continued, waving the federal report, "then who is this standing in my courtroom? And why does the United States government have her detained at an airport at the exact same time you claim she was checking into a hospital?" "It must be a case of identity theft," Grant spoke up. His voice was shaking. "Rowan is sick. She probably forged that document. She is very good with computers, Your Honor. She is an auditor. She fakes things." I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. "I do not fake things. Father," I said, "I find the things that are faked, like your concern for my health, or your grief for grandfather." I leaned over the bench, looking deep into the judge's eyes. "Your Honor, Mr. Vane claims I am agitated. He claims I am unstable, and he is right about one thing. I am agitated." I paused. The room held its breath. "I am agitated because I had to fly in the cargo hold of a crop duster through a thunderstorm to get here," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried to the back of the room. "I am agitated because I had to drive a truck with no brakes down a mountain pass to prevent a theft. But my heart rate? My mental state?" I held out my hand. It was steady. Rock steady. "I am perfectly calm, Your Honor. The only person in this room whose heart is beating out of their chest is my father." I turned slowly to face Grant. "Because he knows what else is in this briefcase," I said. Grant flinched. He actually flinched, shrinking back into his chair as if I had raised a fist. "He knows that the government secrets I was accused of carrying are actually the financial records of the Asherton Trust," I said. "He knows that I have the ledger." "The ledger?" Judge Holloway asked. His interest piqued. "The black book," I said. "The one they tore the house apart looking for. The one grandfather hid under his mattress before they overdosed him." "Objection!" Vane roared. "That is slander. Accusing my clients of murder in open court." "It is not slander if it is written in the deceased's own hand," I said calmly. I reached into the briefcase one last time. I pulled out the black ledger. It was battered. The corners were bent, but it was intact. I held it up. It looked like a Bible. In a way, it was. It was the Book of Judgment. "Your Honor," I said, "I am not here to defend my sanity. I am here to prosecute a crime. This hearing is not about my mental health. It is about $5 million missing from my grandfather's accounts over the last 10 years. And it is about why he died 2 days after he told me he was going to rewrite his will." I placed the ledger on the judge's bench, right on top of the unsigned conservatorship order. "I am ready to proceed," I said. Judge Holloway looked at the ledger. He looked at the DHS report. He looked at the conservatorship order. He picked up the order, the paper that would have stripped me of my rights. He looked at it with disgust. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he tore it in half. "Reap!" The sound was louder than the storm outside. He dropped the pieces into the wastebasket beside his chair. "Mr. Harold," Judge Holloway said, turning his gaze to my stunned attorney, "please help your client to a seat. Mr. Vane, sit down and shut up. Bailiff, secure the doors. No one leaves this room." The judge turned back to me. His eyes were no longer stern. They were respectful. "Ms. Asherton," he said, "take a moment to catch your breath, and then I want to hear everything, starting with this ledger." I nodded. I turned and walked to the plaintiff's table. I sat down in the leather chair that had been empty 5 minutes ago. I felt the wet mud on my legs. I felt the exhaustion crashing against the adrenaline in my blood. But as I looked across the aisle, I saw Grant Asherton bury his face in his hands. I saw Elena staring at the wall, her face a mask of ruin. I took a deep breath. It smelled of justice. I was here, I was sane, and I was about to burn their house of cards to the ground. I did not sit down. The leather chair offered to me by Harold looked comfortable, a place to collapse and let the adrenaline fade. But I knew that the moment I sat, I would lose the momentum. I was not here to rest. I was here to finish the audit. "Ms. Asherton," Judge Holloway said, his voice level but carrying a dangerous undercurrent of suppressed fury. "You have made some very serious allegations regarding the conduct of the defendants. You have presented a federal incident report that directly contradicts the sworn affidavit filed by Mr. Vane. The court is listening." I gripped the edge of the plaintiff's table. My knuckles were white, the only clean part of me. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady, projecting to the back of the room where the bailiff stood guard. "The defense has built their entire case for conservatorship on two pillars. First, that I am mentally unstable. Second, that my grandfather, Arthur Asherton, was mentally incompetent when he attempted to change his estate planning. I intend to dismantle both pillars right now, using the one thing my father has always underestimated, a paper trail." I walked over to the evidence cart. I plugged my phone into the court's presentation system. The large screen on the wall flickered to life. "Exhibit A," I said. "The timeline of the sabotage." A spreadsheet appeared on the screen. It was simple, brutal, and irrefutable. "At 9:30 this morning," I said, pointing to the first row. A call was placed to the Department of Homeland Security tip line. The caller used a burner phone. However, at exactly 9:31, the GPS data from my father's rental car, which I accessed via the family sharing plan he forgot to remove me from, shows that he was parked in a stationary position 2 blocks from the cell tower that pinged the burner phone. Grant Asherton shifted in his seat. He looked like a man trying to make himself invisible. "At 9:45, I continued. "My flight was canceled. The refund was not sent to my personal card. It was routed to a joint account ending in 3390, an account I have not used in 8 years, an account my father controls. He logged in from the courthouse Wi-Fi network at 11:15 this morning. The IP address matches the guest login provided to visitors of this very building." I turned to look at the judge. Holloway's face was reddening. He was a man who prided himself on the sanctity of his courtroom. He realized now that he had been used as a rubber stamp for a kidnapping by proxy. "They did not just try to stop me, Your Honor," I said. "They used the federal government and this court as weapons to commit fraud. They filed a false police report, which is a felony. They filed a false affidavit here, which is perjury, and they committed wire fraud by accessing my airline accounts." "Your Honor!" Julian Vane stood up, but his legs seemed unsteady. "These are circumstantial digital footprints. They prove nothing regarding the estate." "Sit down, Mr. Vane," the judge snapped. "It was not a request. Unless you want me to hold you in contempt right now, you will let the witness speak." Vane collapsed back into his chair. He looked at his clients with open hostility. He knew he was sinking with the ship. "But Mr. Vane raises a point," I said, turning my attention to the lawyer. "Let us talk about the estate. Let us talk about why my parents were so desperate to stop me from reaching this room that they risked federal prison time." I walked back to the bench and picked up the black ledger. I held it high. "For the past 10 years, my parents have claimed to be the devoted caretakers of Arthur Asherton," I said. "They claimed his mind was failing. They claimed he could not manage his money. They took power of attorney." I opened the book to a marked page. "This is not a diary," I said. "This is a forensic accounting of theft. My grandfather may have been old, but he was a logistics genius. He knew numbers, and when he started suspecting that his accounts were draining too fast, he started keeping his own records." I placed the open book under the document camera. The handwriting, shaky but legible, appeared on the massive screen. "On January 4th of last year," I read aloud. My father withdrew $50,000 from the trust for home repairs. There were no repairs. On that same day, a wire transfer of exactly $50,000 was sent to a shell company in the Cayman Islands called Bluebird Holdings. I ran a corporate registry search on Bluebird Holdings this morning while I was in the air. The sole beneficiary is Elena Asherton. Elena let out a gasp. She covered her mouth with her hand. Her eyes were wide with terror. On March 10th, I continued, flipping the page, a withdrawal of $120,000 for medical equipment that same week. My father purchased a vintage Jaguar E-Type. It is currently parked in his garage under a tarp. I looked at the judge. Your Honor, I have audited the last 10 years of the Asherton Trust. The total amount of misappropriated funds is not a few $1,000s. It is $5,432,000. The number hung in the air. $5 million. It was a staggering sum. They bled him dry, I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. They treated his life's work like an ATM, and when he found out when he started asking questions, they decided he had to be silenced. That is enough. Grant Asherton slammed his fist on the table. He stood up, his face purple with rage. I will not sit here and listen to this ungrateful child slander me. I took care of that old man. I wiped his chin. I changed his sheets. He was crazy. He didn't know what day it was. He wrote nonsense in a book because his brain was rotting. Grant was panting. He looked wild. He looked guilty. He was incompetent, Vane added, trying to salvage the wreck. Your Honor, even if the financial allegations have merit, they are a matter for civil litigation later. The issue at hand is the validity of the will and the mental state of the deceased. Arthur Asherton was diagnosed with advanced dementia. Anything he wrote, anything he said, is inadmissible hearsay from an unsound mind. You cannot base a judgment on the scribblings of a senile man. I looked at Vane. I almost felt sorry for him. He had walked into a buzzsaw. You are right, Mr. Vane, I said softly. Paper can be debated. Handwriting can be questioned. Dementia is a convenient shield. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out a small USB drive. But Arthur Asherton knew you would say that, I said. He knew you would call him crazy. He knew you would try to bury the truth under medical jargon and fake sympathy. I held up the drive. 2 days before he died, I said. My grandfather called me. He told me he had found the pill. The blue pill they tried to force him to take instead of his heart medication. He didn't take it. He hid it. And then he asked me how to record a video on his smartphone. I plugged the drive into the presentation system. He was not senile, Father, I said, looking Grant in the eye. He was terrified. He was a prisoner in his own home, and this is his testimony. I hit the spacebar on the laptop. The screen flickered. The audio crackled, and then a face appeared. It was Arthur Asherton. He looked frail. His skin was like parchment, stretched tight over his cheekbones. He was sitting in his armchair, the one by the window where he used to read me stories, but his eyes were sharp. They were the blue steel eyes of the man who had built an empire. He was holding the black ledger in his lap. My name is Arthur James Asherton, the voice on the video said. It was weak, rasping, but clear. Today is May 2nd. I am making this recording because I fear I will not live to see the end of the week. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop humming. Grant slowly sank back into his chair. Elena was shaking her head, muttering, "No, no, no," under her breath. I have discovered that my son, Grant, and his wife, Elena, have been stealing from me. Arthur continued on the screen. I confronted them yesterday. I told them I was calling for an audit. I told them I was calling Rowan. On the screen, Arthur leaned closer to the camera. Since that conversation, the mood in this house has changed. They are no longer angry. They are too nice. Elena brought me tea tonight. It tasted bitter. I poured it in the plant pot. The plant is dead this morning. A collective gasp went through the gallery. Judge Holloway leaned forward, his eyes glued to the screen. "I am tired," Arthur said, rubbing his face. "I am 89 years old. I cannot fight them physically, but I can fight them with the truth." He held up a small plastic bag to the camera. Inside was a blue pill. "This is what they gave me tonight," he said. "They said it was for my blood pressure, but I know my pills. This is a sedative, a strong one. If I take this with my heart condition, my heart will stop. It will look like a natural death, a peaceful passing in the night." Arthur stared into the lens. It felt like he was staring directly at Grant. "If you are watching this," Arthur said, his voice gaining strength, "it means I am dead, and it means Rowan made it to court. Listen to me clearly. I am of sound mind. I revoke all previous wills. I leave my entire estate to my granddaughter, Rowan Asherton, and I hereby accuse my son, Grant Asherton, and his wife, Elena, of conspiracy to commit murder." He paused. A tear tracked through the deep wrinkles of his face. "Grant," he whispered, "I loved you. I gave you everything. Why wasn't it enough?" The screen went black. The video ended. For 3 seconds. There was no sound, no movement. The weight of the revelation crushed the room. It was not just fraud. It was patricide. It was the calculated, cold-blooded murder of a father by his son. Then, the sound of retching broke the silence. Grant Asherton slumped forward, his forehead hitting the wooden table with a dull thud. He slid out of his chair, collapsing onto the floor in a heap of expensive wool and moral ruin. He curled into a ball, his hands covering his ears, moaning. Elena stood up. She looked at her husband on the floor. She looked at the judge. She looked at the bailiff, who was unbuttoning the strap on his holster. The survival instinct of a cornered animal took over. "It was him!" Elena screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Grant. "It was his idea. I told him not to. I told him it was too dangerous. He forced me. He said we were going to lose the house. He made me get the pills from the hospital supply closet. I didn't want to do it." "Mrs. Asherton, be quiet," Vane yelled, realizing his client was confessing to homicide in open court. "I advise you to exercise your right to remain silent." "Shut up," Elena shrieked at Vane. "You knew! You helped him hide the money in the Caymans. You set up the shell company." Vane turned pale. He began to back away from the table, looking for an exit that didn't exist. "Bailiff," Judge Holloway said. His voice was no longer angry. It was cold. It was the voice of the law itself. "Take them into custody, all of them." "Me?" Vane squeaked. "You are an officer of the court." "Mr. Vane," the judge said, "and you have just been implicated in money laundering and accessory to murder. You are not going anywhere." I stood at the plaintiff's table, watching the chaos unfold. I watched the bailiff handcuff my father, who was weeping on the floor. I watched a second officer grab Elena's wrists as she tried to scratch Vane's face. I felt hollow. I thought I would feel triumph. I thought I would feel a rush of victory. But all I felt was a profound, aching sadness. My grandfather was dead. He had died alone, afraid, knowing his own son was the executioner. All the money in the world, all the audits, all the justice in this room could not undo that terrified night in his bedroom. I looked at the black ledger on the judge's desk. I looked at the blank screen where my grandfather's face had been. "I heard you. Grandpa," I whispered. "I got the message." Judge Holloway looked at me. He looked at the wreckage of the defense table. "Ms. Asherton," he said softly, "the court accepts the video as a dying declaration. The court accepts the ledger as evidence. The motion for conservatorship is denied with prejudice. The previous will is declared invalid due to undue influence and fraud, as the sole heir under the holographic will presented in the video." He paused, banging his gavel. "The estate is yours, and may God have mercy on their souls, because this court certainly will not." The gavel did not bang. It did not make the sharp, percussive sound of order being restored. Instead, Judge Holloway set it down gently, almost reverently, as if the wood itself might shatter under the weight of what had just been revealed in his courtroom. The silence that followed was heavy, pressing against my eardrums like the pressure drop before a tornado touches down. "This court is hereby recessed," Judge Holloway said, his voice projecting a terrifying calm that was far worse than his shouting. "I am suspending the probate proceedings for the estate of Arthur Asherton, effective immediately. This is no longer a civil matter regarding the distribution of assets. This is now a criminal matter regarding the preservation of a crime scene." He turned his gaze toward the court reporter, a young woman whose fingers were trembling over her steno machine. "Strike the record of the conservatorship motion," the judge ordered, "and open a new file. I want the transcript of this hearing, the video evidence provided by the plaintiff, and the physical ledger currently in my possession to be sealed and transferred immediately to the office of the district attorney." "Your Honor," Julian Vane squeaked, his voice cracking. He was standing near the edge of the defense table, clutching his briefcase like a life preserver. "Surely there is no need for such drastic measures. My clients are distraught. This video could be a deepfake. Technology these days is very advanced." Judge Holloway looked at Vane. It was the look a biologist gives a particularly interesting, yet repulsive, specimen under a microscope. "Mr. Vane," the judge said, "I suggest you stop worrying about the authenticity of the video and start worrying about the authenticity of your license to practice law. Bailiff, take Mr. and Mrs. Asherton into custody." The movement was swift. 2 deputies who had been standing by the side doors moved in. There was a metallic jingle, the sound of handcuffs being unhooked from utility belts. It was a sound I had heard 1,000 times on television. But hearing it in real life, directed at the people who had raised me, caused a strange, cold sensation in the pit of my stomach. It was not joy. It was the clinical detachment of seeing a tumor finally excised. Grant Asherton was still on the floor, curled in a fetal position. When the deputy reached down to grab his arm, my father recoiled, lashing out with a frantic, animalistic energy. "Get off me!" he screamed, his voice raw. "Do not touch me. I am Grant Asherton. I own this town. I am the victim here. That girl is the one you want. She is the one who manipulated him." The deputy, a man who looked like he wrestled steers on the weekends, did not engage in a debate. He simply leveraged my father's arm behind his back and hauled him to his feet. My father's expensive suit jacket tore at the shoulder seam with a distinct ripping sound. "Grant Asherton, you are under arrest for perjury, fraud, and suspicion of manslaughter," the deputy recited, the Miranda warning following in a practiced monotone. Elena did not fight. She went limp. As the second deputy cuffed her wrists behind her back, she stared at me. Her eyes were wide, glassy, and completely empty. She looked like a doll that had been broken and discarded. She was muttering something, over and over again. "The blue pill. It was just to help him sleep. Just to help him sleep." I stood at the plaintiff's table, my hand resting on the wet mahogany. I watched them. These were the people who had taught me to tie my shoes. These were the people who had attended my piano recitals. And these were the people who had looked at my grandfather, a man who had built a legacy for them, and decided he was worth more dead than alive. Julian Vane saw the writing on the wall. While the deputies were wrestling with my father, Vane began to sidestep toward the aisle. He was trying to make himself small, trying to blend into the woodwork, hoping that in the chaos, everyone would forget the lawyer who had facilitated the entire scheme. He made it as far as the swinging gate that separated the bar from the gallery. "Going somewhere, Julian?" I asked. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the noise of my father's screaming like a razor blade. Vane froze. He turned to look at me. A sickly smile plastered on his face. "Rowan," he said, his voice trembling. "I have to get back to the office. I need to pull the files to help the authorities. I had no idea. You must believe me. I was just acting on the information provided by your parents." I walked over to him. I was barefoot. My feet left damp footprints on the carpet. I stopped inches from him. I could smell his fear. It smelled like sweat and expensive cologne. "You knew about the shell company in the Caymans," I said softly. "You set it up. I saw your signature on the incorporation documents in the ledger. You are the registered agent for Bluebird Holdings." Vane's face went white. "That is standard asset protection." "And the affidavit?" I asked, tilting my head. "The one you filed saying I was in rehab? You notarized it, Julian. You swore an oath that you witnessed me sign a document that I never saw. That is not standard protection. That is a felony." Vane opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. I leaned in closer, dropping my voice to a whisper so only he could hear. "I sent a full digital copy of the ledger, including the page with your signature, to the State Bar Association Ethics Committee while I was in the air." I lied. I hadn't sent it yet. But he didn't know that. "And I copied the district attorney. They are probably waiting for you in the lobby." Vane looked at the door. He looked at me. The arrogant sheen was gone. He looked old and defeated. He slumped his shoulders and turned back to the judge, realizing there was no exit. "Rowan!" The scream came from my father. He was being led toward the side door, the one reserved for prisoners. He twisted his body, fighting the deputy's grip, to look at me one last time. His face was a mask of pure hatred. The mask of the loving father had dissolved completely, revealing the narcissist underneath. "You ungrateful wretch," he bellowed, spit flying from his lips. "I gave you everything. I paid for your school. I paid for your life. And this is how you repay me? By destroying your family? You are cold. You are a monster. You are no daughter of mine." The courtroom fell silent again, waiting for my reaction, waiting for the daughter to break down, to cry, to beg for forgiveness. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had frozen my bank account to stop me from saving his father. I felt nothing, no anger, no sadness, just a profound, quiet clarity. "You are right, Grant," I said, my voice steady. "I am not your daughter. I am Arthur Asherton's granddaughter, and unlike you, I know the difference between a family and a balance sheet." The deputy shoved him through the door. The heavy metal barrier slammed shut, cutting off his cursing. Elena followed, weeping silently, dragged in the wake of her husband's destruction, and then they were gone. The room exhaled. Judge Holloway looked at me. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. He looked exhausted. "Ms. Asherton," he said, "the court apologizes for everything. The order is signed. The police will take statements from you later. You are free to go." "Thank you, Your Honor," I said. I turned and walked down the aisle. The spectators in the gallery, townsfolk, reporters who had sniffed a story, parted from me as if I were radioactive. They stared at my mud-stained clothes, my bare feet, my wild hair. They whispered behind their hands. I didn't care. I pushed through the double doors and stepped out into the main lobby. It was empty. The storm outside had passed, leaving behind a silence that felt heavy and clean. I walked out the front doors of the courthouse. The cold air of Montana hit me like a slap in the face. It was freezing, sharp, and smelling of wet pine and snow. It filled my lungs, scrubbing away the stale air of the courtroom, the smell of fear and lies. I stood on the top step, looking out over the small town of Blackwood. The clouds were breaking in the west, allowing shafts of golden late-afternoon sunlight to pierce through. The wet pavement shone like a mirror. My truck, the battered Ford F-150, was still sitting on the lawn where I had abandoned it. A police officer was writing a ticket and sticking it under the wiper blade. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. It had 10% battery left. I dialed a number from the call history. "Miller," the voice answered on the first ring. It was sharp, alert. "It is Rowan Asherton," I said. "Where are you?" Special Agent Miller asked. "I have been monitoring the flight logs. Did you make it?" "I made it," I said, watching the police officer walk around the truck. "And I have the verdict." "And?" "The judge invalidated the will," I said. "He revoked the conservatorship And he just had my parents arrested for fraud, perjury, and suspicion of homicide. There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear the background noise of O'Hare Airport, the announcements, the chaos I had left behind hours ago. Homicide? Miller asked. The tipster? Elena, I said. She confessed in open court, but the real crime was the conspiracy. They used your agency to try to cover up a murder. Agent Miller. They called in a bomb threat to stop a witness to a capital crime. Miller let out a low whistle. Okay, that changes things. That moves it from a misuse of resources to federal obstruction of a homicide investigation. We have jurisdiction. I figured you might, I said. I have the recording of the hearing. I have the ledger. I have the video confession from the victim. When do you want them? I am sending a field team from the Billings office, Miller said. They will be there in 2 hours to take custody of the digital evidence. Do not let that phone out of your sight. I won't, I said. Agent Miller? Yeah? Thank you, I said, for listening to the tape, for letting me go. Just doing the job. Ms. Asherton, Miller said. You take care of yourself. You sound tired. I am, I admitted. I am very tired. I hung up. I walked down the marble steps. The mud from the lawn was cold against my toes. I walked up to the police officer who was finishing the ticket. That is my truck, I said. The officer looked at me. He looked at the ticket. He looked at the courthouse. He seemed to recognize me from the commotion earlier. You parked on the petunias, ma'am, he said, but his voice wasn't stern. I had a deadline, I said. He ripped the ticket off the windshield. He crumpled it up and put it in his pocket. Drive carefully, he said. The roads are still slick. I will, I said. I climbed into the cab of the Ford. It smelled of old coffee and wet dog. It was the most comforting smell in the world. I started the engine. It coughed, sputtered, and roared to life. I didn't turn back toward the airstrip. Jack could wait. The plane could wait. I turned the truck west, toward the setting sun. I drove out of town, the buildings giving way to the open range. The mountains rose up on either side of me, majestic and indifferent to the petty dramas of human beings. I was alone. My parents were in a cell. My grandfather was in the ground. The estate, the $50 million, the burden of the Asherton legacy. It was all mine now. I thought about the future. There would be trials. There would be press conferences. There would be months of untangling the financial mess my father had created. I would have to rebuild the company. I would have to hire new lawyers, new accountants. I would have to clean house. It was a daunting mountain to climb. But as I watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and blood orange, I felt a strange sense of peace. I had survived the storm. I had survived the betrayal. I had survived the system that tried to crush me. I reached over and touched the passenger seat, where the black ledger sat. We did it, Grandpa, I whispered. The books are balanced. I rolled down the window, letting the cold wind whip my hair. I didn't turn on the radio. I just drove, a survivor in a rusted chariot, heading into the darkness, ready to build a new dawn. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a wild ride with Rowan, and I hope you enjoyed every twist and turn of her journey for justice. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from a busy airport, a quiet room, or maybe on a drive of your own? Please leave a comment below and let me know. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to the channel BitterSweet Drama Stories, hitting that like button, and smashing the hype button to help this story get recommended to more people. Your support means the world to us and helps us keep bringing you these emotional roller coasters. See you in the next story.